FBI detective. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1, FBI New Trainee Agent. New York, 26 Federal Plaza, Manhattan, Jacob Federal Office Building, 9 a.m. Floors 23 to 26 are the exclusive headquarters of the New York branch of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In a small conference room. I didn't expect that I would become the legendary FBI. Luo An sat on a chair in the corner behind the conference table. He raised his hand to see his neat suit and then looked at the golden badge on his chest. His face was wooden. He remembered that he just went to the island country to investigate the local customs and local characteristics. How did he come here in a blink of an eye on the plane? Bang! The door of the conference room was pushed open, and a middle-aged white man with a Mediterranean hairstyle and a suit walked in with a folder in his hand. He glanced around and saw that there were no people missing. He went straight to the point without any nonsense. Attention, this is a shooting murder case in the park. The Mediterranean opened the folder, threw a bunch of photos on the conference table and introduced. The victim's name is Mike Robert, 43 years old. At 11:34 p.m. on April 11, 2005, he was shot and killed on the path in the Central Park. Hearing the overview of the case, the trainee detectives on both sides of the conference table went to take the photos on the conference table. Luo An did not move. He was sorting out the paste-like memories in his mind. In his previous life, he was raised by an old killer who was lingering on. When he grew up, he naturally learned a lot of skills. He had strong professional skills and high technical level. He had never failed since he entered the industry and had never received orders from others. The old killer raised Luo An for the purpose of letting Luo An avenge his blood. As a result, when the old killer died and Luo An successfully went out to find his enemy, he learned that his enemy had been arrested by local law enforcement agencies and sentenced to death by the court. The enemy was alone and had no relatives, and Luo An did not dare to confront the prison head-on. After thinking for a few seconds, he turned around and boarded a plane to the island country, preparing to experience the local customs and people first, and then open a milk tea shop to spend the rest of his life. It is impossible to be a killer, and it is impossible to do it in this life. Not only is the risk factor high, but the money also comes slowly. How can you make money by opening a milk tea shop in an island country? Sir, there is one thing I don't understand. When Mediterranean briefly introduced the case, Fisher, a white young man with short brown hair and thin lips, tilted his head and asked, "Why did you give this case to us? There is no need to mobilize the FBI for an ordinary murder case. The New York Police Department can handle it by itself." Without waiting for Haidu to answer, Mona, a short-haired white beauty wearing a formal suit with unusually smooth curves and an extremely aerodynamic figure, looked at Fisher with disdain and said, "The victim was a black special correspondent who had returned from a war zone, and the word pest was written in blood next to the body. It is obvious that this was a special hate crime against the victim's identity. Special hate crimes are under the jurisdiction of the FBI." After hearing Mona's words, Haidu nodded calmly and glanced at Luo An, who was motionless at the end of the conference table. He frowned slightly but ignored him, clapped his hands to attract everyone's attention and said, "This special hate crime case is the next stage of the test. You 20 new trainee detectives must solve the case and catch the murderer by yourself within 3 days. Senior detectives will give corresponding points according to your performance. Those with high points can be transferred to formal detectives first, and those with low points will continue to work hard." After speaking, Haidu turned around and left the conference room without sorting out the folders. The moment the door of the conference room closed, there was a bang in the conference room, and many new trainee detectives leaned forward to check the photos and clues. What are the pests on the ground next to the victim's body targeting? Are they black people or journalists? It's possible that they are both. Maybe they are journalists more. After all, the victim came back from a war zone. There are a bunch of religious lunatics there. It's not surprising that they do anything. Not necessarily. The victim also reported a lot of corruption issues among parliamentarians. There are really enemies everywhere. Ignoring everyone, just as Mediterranean was leaving the meeting room, Luo An suddenly heard a buzzing sound in his ear. Before he could react, a light blue page suddenly appeared in front of him. System loading. System loading successful. Today's treasure box is ready. Do you want to open it? Newbie gift pack is ready. Do you want to open it? Luo An's pupils shrank, and he breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that no one else noticed the abnormality here. All these years of reading novels have not been in vain. Those authors are not deceiving me. Time travelers do have a system bonus. Luo An took a deep breath and said silently in his heart, open. A rough web game treasure chest opening cutscene. The system shows that today's treasure chest opens a $20 note and a $50 note. Newbie gift pack, a bottle of hemostatic potion and a bottle of aqualung potion. Seeing the system page that has been silent since then, Luo An blinked and was a little confused for a moment. This system is so simple. The trainee agents were all eager to analyze the clues. Trainee agent Fisher suddenly raised his eyebrows when he saw the wound on the chest of the deceased, looked up and shouted, Luo An, go to my desk quickly and get the third folder in the upper right corner. The imagined response did not sound. Fisher turned around in confusion and found that Luo An was sitting in the corner of the conference table, thinking with his head down, and didn't pay any attention to what he said. Fisher's face sank, picked up the signature pen in his hand, and threw it at Luo An. Bang! Hearing the sound of wind in the air, Luo An, who was sorting out his memories, subconsciously raised his hand to grab it. Holding the pen, Luo An turned his head to look at Fisher after closing the system page, and a memory instantly emerged in his mind. Some time ago, when the predecessor went out to perform a mission with Fisher and another trainee agent named Mackie, the two of them made a mistake during the operation, which led to the escape of the criminal. When reporting to the superior, the predecessor was deducted 100 points, while Fisher and Mackie were just scolded and gone, without a single point deducted. In the memory, the predecessor was so angry that his face turned blue after hearing the news, but he had no background and could only choose to tolerate it temporarily in order to get a regular job as soon as possible, which made Fisher more and more bossy to the predecessor. Luo An frowned slightly. He didn't have the tolerant character of his predecessor. Just as he was about to take action, Mona, who noticed what happened on the other side, threw her signature pen at Fisher and asked loudly, what are you doing? Can't you take your own things yourself? Mona was a rare computer expert among their group of new trainee detectives. In addition, she was beautiful and had a good figure. Fisher didn't say much after being hit by the signature pen. He snorted coldly and picked up the notebook to start recording the clues on the photos. Don't pay attention to him, he's just a spoiled bastard. Seeing that Luo An looked unhappy, Mona, who was curvy, walked to him with a few photos and sat down, comforting him. The information given by the superior said that catching the murderer of this case can get 80 points, which can make up for most of the points you lost some time ago, and there is also a $50,000 reward from the New York Journalists Association. For this case, $50,000? In 2005, the salary of American workers was only around $2,500. Luo An didn't care about the first 80 points, but the $50,000 behind made his eyes light up instantly, because he remembered what the old killer said to him in his previous life. I'm not in the mood to listen to those bullshit love stories. When I was young, I just wanted to make money. What's the point of envying others? We have to take action ourselves. We have to become richer than them. Chapter 2. Because he's handsome. Luo An agreed with the old killer's words. He had originally thought that if he couldn't make it in the FBI, he would go out and do some private work to make money, but he didn't expect that the FBI could actually make legal money by solving cases. Seeing the pile of unsolved cases in the archives of the FBI New York branch in his memory, as well as the strings of numbers behind the cases, and thinking of the well-known American Department eyes, Luo An instantly became energetic. He grabbed Mona, who was still introducing the case to him, and whispered, how about we work alone on this case and split the reward in half afterward? Generally speaking, new trainee detectives investigate such cases in teams of 3 to 5 people, considering both the reasonable distribution of points and safety. After all, in the peaceful America, gunfights are every day. Hearing Luo An's words, Mona fell silent and laughed a few seconds later. This joke is not funny, Luo An. It seems that you have never solved a case alone since you joined the FBI New York branch. That was the me before, not the me now. Luo An is very confident that he can solve the case. He really can't solve the case, but he can commit the crime. They are both cases, and the two should be similar. Seeing Luo An's handsome face, which is no less handsome than the reader's, staring at her, Mona's heart skipped a beat. After a light cough, she cast her eyes on the photos on the table. We'll talk about this later. Take a look at the relevant information of this case first. Okay. Luo An did not force Mona, and he really needed to see the photos of the crime scene. On the other side, in a bright and spacious office, 5 middle-aged men in shirts were drinking coffee while watching the big screen hanging on the wall. The big screen was a real-time image of the 20 trainee detectives analyzing the case in the conference room. Hailey knocked on the door and walked into the office. He handed the folder in his hand to the 5 investigation team leaders one by one and smiled. "Sirs, these are the personal information and probation performance of the new trainee detectives in the conference room." "Okay." Hailey turned and left. The 5 investigation team leaders began to look through the information in their hands. After a while, they selected several detectives who they wanted to transfer to their own investigation team in the future. The leader of the first investigation team, Bruce, took a sip of coffee, tilted his head, and glanced at the person chosen by the leader of the 5th investigation team, August, frowned and asked, "August, why did you choose Roan Greenwood?" "Oh, choose Roan Greenwood?" Hearing Bruce's words, the other 3 team leaders became interested. They also looked at Roan Greenwood's performance data during this period, but they all chose to give up on him. It's no wonder that people who dare not fight back when being bullied can't get by in a place like the FBI. Even if Roan finds an opportunity to beat Fisher up, the 3 team leaders will have a higher evaluation of Roan. The leader of the 5th investigation team is a middle-aged black man with a big belly named August. Seeing that several colleagues were looking at him in confusion, Augustus crossed his legs and laughed. "There is no other reason, just because Roan Greenwood is handsome." Several team leaders turned their heads to look at the big screen, only to see Roan with short brown hair, strong features, tall and well-proportioned body without looking bloated, and the muscles inside could be seen through the suit. He is indeed a handsome guy. The leader of the 2nd investigation team nodded, tilted his head and smiled. "But what's the use of a weak guy being handsome? I'm afraid he wouldn't dare to shoot when he meets a criminal. And our FBI agents don't need to be too handsome. It's too easy to leave an impression on others." Augustus didn't care about the other party's cheesing, drank his coffee in one gulp, and replied with a smile, "Soft guys also have their uses. With Roan's face, as long as he is simply trained for a few months, he will definitely be a weapon against female criminals." On the other side, in the conference room, Roan looked at the body of the victim in the photo with a calm expression. In his opinion, in normal crimes, excluding murders in the heat of passion, there are only 3 reasons for murder: for money, for love, and for revenge. The wound on the victim's heart in the photo is very large. According to experience, the distance between the shooter and the victim will never exceed 2 meters. In addition, the victim died at night and was shot from the front, so the murderer most likely followed Mike Robert for a long time and then stopped him at the place where the victim died. With Mona's confused expression, Luo An analyzed to her seriously, "But this is actually just a test. The murderer has already determined that the person he wants to kill is the person in front of him. So the moment Mike Robert turned around, bang, he was shot to death." "Wait a minute." Mona crossed her hands in front of her chest to interrupt Luo An's analysis and asked in confusion, "How do you know that the murderer was following Mike, not waiting for Mike there, and he also called him?" "It doesn't matter." Luo An waved his hand and did not answer Mona's question. This was all the killer's experience, and it was not convenient to say, so he continued, "Based on the photos of the crime scene, I can be sure that the murderer took one or more things from Mike. This is also the murderer's goal, so we..." "Stop." Mona interrupted Luo An's analysis and said seriously, "Luo An, what you are saying now is just your speculation, and the crime scene report did not say that anything was missing from the victim. Why do you think the murderer was premeditated and not a crime of passion? There are also crimes of passion and hate crimes. Luo An smiled slightly and did not answer. Instead, he asked, do you want to join me and solve this case with me? We will split the bounty in half. Mona is a computer expert and she really needs the help of technical talents. She won't play house with you, a rookie who is really involved in solving a case for the first time. Without waiting for Mona to answer, Fisher, who had been analyzing clues with other agents for a long time, came over with a notebook and said to Roan, listen, Roan, as long as you beg me now, I will still reserve a position for you in my team to organize information, because you have always organized information quickly and neatly in the past, and I'm very optimistic about you. Hearing Fisher's words, several trainee agents who had a good relationship with him laughed out loud. Marky, the guy who had once tricked Roan, also walked up to him and put his arm around Roan's shoulders. This is actually for your own good, Roan. Think about it carefully, you can get points just by organizing information. How simple and easy it is. You don't have to run around, and there is no danger of encountering criminals. Roan sneered at the corner of his mouth, his eyes grim. He smiled and put his arms around Fisher and Marky's shoulders and said in a deep voice, how about this? You join my team, and I'll go out and investigate the murderer, and you can help me organize the information. This is also for your own good. Just think about it, you can get points just by organizing the information. How simple and easy it is, and there is no danger of encountering the criminals. When Luo An's words fell into the ears of the two, Fisher and Marky's faces flushed, and they were furious. They subconsciously reached out to Luo An, trying to push him away from their sides. You can't argue with me, but you still want to fight? Before the two could react, Luo An suddenly shouted, and then he clenched his right fist and hit Fisher's left ear hard, then bent down to avoid Marky's right hand, and kicked Marky's ankle. With a click, Marky screamed loudly, and his leg, which he didn't have time to retract, was pulled by Luo An again, and was directly pulled forward by Luo An. It hit Fisher's crotch. Chapter 3 I'm acting in self-defense. In front of the conference room door, Fisher's ears were bleeding, and he was covering his crotch with his hands. He fell to the ground and screamed. Marky lay on the ground with his legs split and wailed. His left foot was twisted in a strange arc. Hey, stop. Pull them apart. Roan's movements were too fast. It took only a few seconds from the time he shouted, and actually took action to the time Fisher and Marky fell to the ground. Many trainee agents in the office had not reacted. It was not until the two fell to the ground and screamed that the trainee agents beside them came to their senses. Several trainee agents who had a good relationship with Fisher looked at each other and rushed to throw Roan to the ground. Roan rushed left and right, holding the notebook snatched from Fisher's hand, either sweeping horizontally or shooting vertically, easily killing the trainee agents who tried to surround him, and mercilessly gave a fierce facial massage to several familiar faces in his memory. Fouquet. How Lixie. Jesus. Several trainee detectives standing aside and watching the show kept saying this. They stood there waving their hands in shock, not knowing what to do. Those who wanted to stop the fight didn't know which side to stop. Fisher had more people on his side, and Luo An couldn't win. Mona and several female trainee detectives standing aside stared at this scene in amazement. Luo An snorted coldly, knocked down the last person, and threw the notebook in his hand fiercely at Fisher. You are all useless. You are still solving cases? A group of people can't beat me. Luo An accidentally threw the notebook off center and hit Fisher's crotch, and he screamed again. With his legs split, Marky's eyes flashed with fear and anger, and he shouted loudly, if you have the guts, don't leave here. It's a felony for an FBI agent to attack another agent. I won't run away. Who said I was attacking an agent? The surveillance camera is watching. A group of people wanted to hit me, and I was acting in self-defense. Luo An casually took a chair from the conference table and sat down, crossed his legs and sneered, and I suspect you have bad intentions towards me. When the senior agent comes, I will sue you for first-degree murder. Fouquet. Hearing the felony of first-degree murder, the people who were still standing there looked surprised. They didn't expect Luo An to make such a big deal about this. The air in the office with the large screen was extremely quiet. Seeing Luo An sitting on a chair and waiting for the investigator in the surveillance camera, the 5 investigation team leaders had different expressions. The expressions of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th investigation team leaders were okay. Apart from being surprised at Luo An's extraordinary skills, they didn't say much. After hearing that Roan was going to sue the trainee detectives for first-degree murder, August, the head of the 5th investigation team, laughed out loud, and the head of the 1st investigation team, Luo An, turned pale. Ha 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 ha. August laughed so hard that he almost couldn't breathe, holding his big belly. Yes, I didn't make a mistake. Seeing Roan sitting on the chair in the conference room and observing the camera, August thought that Roan guessed that the head of the investigation team would observe them after this meeting, so he chose to attack and hurt people. But during the fight, except for throwing the notebook at the end, all of Roan's actions were in line with legitimate defense. If the two sides really go to court, excluding off-court factors, Roan's chances of winning are much greater than those of Fisher and Mackey. Augustus' laughter slowly disappeared, and his eyes turned towards Luo An with an extremely hot expression. I like this guy. He's handsome, smart, and skilled, and he's a bit like me when I was young. The leaders of investigation team 234 glanced at Augustus's big black face and big belly, then looked at Luo An's handsome face and figure sitting there like a model in the surveillance video, and they all spit in their hearts. Hey, Broson. Augustus turned to look at the livid head of the number 1 investigation team, laughed, and said, give me some face. Let's forget about this. The number 5 investigation team was just established not long ago, and I just need someone like Luo An who is good at both fighting and brains. No. I'll buy you a drink tonight. No. Huh. Augustus raised his eyebrows, pointed at Fisher who was still holding his crotch and wailing in the camera, and said, then I'll go find the team leader. I want to ask why the 3-person team only deducted points from Luo An when the previous mission failed. Point for K. Broson snorted coldly, slammed the table heavily, turned around and strode away. Good boy. Augustus laughed, picked up Luo An Greenwood's information, and left the office. The heads of the 2nd, 3rd and 4th investigation teams looked at each other, shook their heads, and turned around to leave. Training department. Interrogation room. Hey, Kit, you're awesome. Old York, a senior agent from the training department, walked into the room, sat down on a chair, picked up a cigarette and started smoking. Want one? No, thank you. Roan, who was sitting on a chair with his legs crossed, refused. I don't smoke. Good boy. Old York nodded, put away his lighter, took a puff of smoke and exhaled, then began to look at Roan seriously, clicked his tongue a few times, and said with a smile, you know, Roan, you're completely famous now. Everyone on the 23rd and 24th floors of the FBI's New York branch knows that a tough new trainee agent fought 10 people alone, not only one, but also remained unscathed. It's not that I'm strong, it's that those people are too weak. Hearing Roan's words, Old York was even happier. America likes strong people, and he, a redneck from Texas, is even more so. He then asked, aren't you worried? Roan puzzled, what are you worried about? Internal fighting among agents is a felony. Aren't you worried that you will be suspended or fired? Old York threatened Luo An. I was acting in self-defense. Luo An widened his eyes, which were full of sincerity. There are cameras in the conference room. The whole process of me being attacked by the other party was recorded. You can't frame me. Ha ha ha. To be honest, I like you very much. If someone hadn't acted quickly, I would definitely transfer you to my place. Old York exhaled a puff of smoke and laughed, then stood up and opened the door of the interrogation room. Let's go, Kit. Someone is outside to pick you up. Thank you, sir. Luo An was very polite. He stood up and walked out of the interrogation room and found that the person waiting for him outside was Mona. Mona walked up and handed Roan the golden FBI badge, smiling and joking. Wow, isn't this our super agent Roan Greenwood who can fight 10 people at once? How is the air conditioning in the interrogation room? Is it good? It's actually okay. At least I can't smell Fisher and Mack's bad breath and body odor here. Roan took the FBI badge, pinned it on his chest, tilted his head to look at Mona, and asked with a smile, it seems that you have agreed to join my team. There's no way. Fisher and the others have gone to the hospital for a checkup. I'm afraid they won't have the face to come back for a while. Mona spread her hands and walked side by side with Roan to the elevator. The elevator door slowly closed. Roan stretched out his hand to Mona with a smile on his face. Well, happy cooperation. Happy cooperation. By the way, if the case is successfully solved, the bounty will be split in half. Of course, we agreed. New book, please read it. Please recommend. Chapter 4 White and Black Radish. New York Presbyterian Hospital, Lower Manhattan Branch. The patient's condition is not serious. He will be fine after a month of rest. Okay, thank you, doctor. Seeing the doctor turn and leave, the leader of the number 1 investigation team, Bruce, turned his eyes to the ward. Seeing Fish lying on the bed wailing loudly with his legs still in the posture of being crossed, his face sank, and he cursed in a low voice. A bunch of people can't beat one person. What a waste. Roan Greenwood was protected by Augustus, and Bruce felt that it was not good for him to take action now, but according to his subordinates, Roan Greenwood was now investigating the Park murder case. As long as he doesn't find the murderer within 3 days, things will be easy. Without the intention of meeting Fisher, the unlucky nephew, Bruce turned and left the office area of the number 5 investigation team. In the leader's office, Roan sat in a chair, looking at the big-bellied black man behind the desk, his face indifferent. After leaving the interrogation room of the training department, he was brought here by Mona. Luo An guessed that the other party was the officer who transferred him out. It seemed that his previous performance of beating Fisher and others was in his favor. As for the other party's little trick of not speaking and just staring at him, Luo An didn't feel anything. It was just a simple show of power. He treated the other party as a white radish, a black radish. Black radish. Augustus looked at Luo An, who was calm and neither humble nor arrogant, and liked him more and more. He didn't waste any words and said directly, I'm Augustus, the leader of the number 5 investigation team. To be honest, Luo An, I like you very much. Luo An frowned, feeling that there seemed to be something wrong with this sentence. But your current situation is very troublesome. Fighting is always wrong. Hearing this, Luo An nodded in his heart. Here it comes, and the next step is to use carrots and sticks. Augustus took a sip of coffee and continued, this is part of the information on the Park shooting and murder case. It is now 12 o'clock noon. I will give you 3 days to catch the murderer. If you succeed, I will immediately transfer you to the number 5 investigation team and make you a formal agent. If you fail, Augustus threw the folder on the desk to Luo An and smiled. I will also transfer you to the number 5 investigation team, but you will be responsible for organizing documents and writing case reports for the next 6 months. Do you understand? Okay. Luo An nodded, then looked up and asked, if I successfully solve the case, how will the reward be divided? If you solve the case yourself, the reward will naturally be yours. Thank you, sir. Luo An stopped talking nonsense, picked up the folder, and left the office. Seeing Luo An's tall and straight back, Augustus nodded in appreciation and exclaimed, young, handsome, smart, decisive, and polite. He is so much like me when I was young. Amid the curious and puzzled gazes of the agents, Luo An walked out of the office area of the number 5 investigation team without changing his expression, patted Mona on the shoulder, who was waiting for him at the door of the office area, and smiled. Let's go, teammates. We have 3 days to get the bounty. What, you think 3 days is a long time? Mona rolled her eyes at Luo An, took the folder, and walked towards the elevator. While looking at the information she asked, where are we going next? Let's get the weapons first. In the equipment warehouse, Mona applied for a bulletproof vest and a Glock 19. After sorting them out, she turned to look at Luo An's equipment and was stunned. Roan was wearing a pitch black combat uniform, holding a tactical helmet, a plate-carrying vest on his chest, and several bags on his waist, filled with smoke bombs and stun grenades. There were also 2 Glock 18 submachine guns in his holsters. Mona took a closer look and found that Roan also had 6 extended magazines for the pistols. The extended magazine of Glock 18 can hold 33 rounds of bullets, and you actually took 8 magazines. Mona felt like she was going crazy and asked loudly, this is New York, we are going to investigate a case. Do you think this is going to the battlefield? Because this is New York, I took so many things. Hearing Mona's shouting, Luo An spread his hands and looked helpless. If the equipment warehouse did not allow it, I would also like to take a few grenades and submachine guns. Point for K. Mona covered her forehead with her hands and whispered to herself, I'm really crazy. I actually agreed to team up with such a person. Luo An explained seriously, listen, Mona, there is only one life. I don't want to die before I make money. Let's go. We only have 3 days. Seeing Luo An's back striding away and the surprised eyes of the passerby agents, Mona's mouth twitched, and after hesitating for a few seconds, she followed. But she didn't dare to look up all the way. Central Park, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The two drove to the path where the crime scene occurred. It was already daytime and many tourists were strolling in the park. Seeing Luo An's fully armed figure, passers-by subconsciously avoided him. Several patrolling police officers even approached to ask about Luo An's identity, but they were all blocked by Mona, who was holding an FBI ID. Seeing the puzzled eyes and various looks around, Mona forced herself to hold back her breath, tilted her head and asked, what are we doing here? The crime scene has been cleaned up by the New York Police Department after taking photos and searching for clues. There are no clues here. Luo An stood at the place where Mike's body was in the photo, thinking, and replied after hearing Mona's question, no, the location of death is the biggest clue. Seeing the question mark on Mona's face, Luo An said seriously, have you ever thought about a question? That is, why did the murderer kill Mike at this location? Because there was no one else here, except the murderer and the deceased? This is just one of the reasons. Luo An nodded and continued, the more important reason is that this place is hidden enough, and it is convenient to leave after killing someone. Luo An pointed around and introduced to Mona, to the west of this location are rivers and lakes. The testimonies of several passers-by did not mention the sound of passing boats, so it is impossible for the murderer to escape from the direction of the river after killing people. To the south and north are paths leading to the road, and to the east is a large forest. The case report shows that the New York Police Department did not find any useful clues in the woods, so. Mona's eyes lit up and she continued, so the murderer escaped from the crime scene from the path to the south or north? No, the murderer escaped from the woods. Luo An shook his head and continued, when the passers-by in the testimony heard the gunshots, they were walking together on the north-south paths of the crime scene, so the murderer could only escape from the woods. Mona thought briefly and found that the testimony was indeed true. After another thought, she asked, but the New York Police Department searched the woods to the east with police dogs, and they found no clues. Dogs can't, but I can. New book, please read it. Please recommend. Thank you all. Someone asked the author before why the protagonist Luo An didn't carry a rifle. Let me explain here. According to regulations, the main job of FBI agents is to investigate cases and look for clues. Therefore, most of the weapons allowed to be carried are pistols, and rifles and submachine guns are not allowed. When encountering the enemy, the requirements for FBI agents are to seek support immediately and put self-preservation first. Therefore, no FBI agent will hold a rifle, knock on people's doors, and ask for clues. Long guns and short guns are two different things. Those who can hold rifles and submachine guns belong to the SWAT team in the FBI. This department fights criminals head on. As for the equipment of the SWAT team, it will be at the beginning of the next chapter. Chapter 5 Stalker. Luo An scanned the crime scene, automatically ignoring the onlookers in the distance. His expression slightly changed, and he began to simulate the murderer's behavior at the time of the crime using the killer's modus operandi. Time seemed to flow backwards, and in the dark park path, the murderer followed Mike all the way. Mike seemed to have noticed something, and began to jog, but he did not shake off the other party. At this time, the murderer called out Mike's name, and Mike turned around and agreed helplessly. Bang! Luo An narrowed his eyes slightly, and his right hand simulated the action of shooting. Then he stood for a few seconds, where Mike's body was, and then suddenly ran towards the woods in the east. Mona, who was standing next to him, was confused after watching Luo An's actions. Seeing Luo An running towards the woods in big strides, she hurriedly stood up and tried to catch up with him, but there were too many branches in the woods. Mona just lowered her head to avoid the branches, and when she looked up again, Luo An was gone. Shit. Mona cursed, but she didn't understand why Luo An could run so fast in the woods. They all graduated from the FBI Academy in Virginia. Did someone give Luo An special treatment? Since she couldn't catch up with Luo An, Mona decided not to follow him, and turned around to walk back to the crime scene, ready to wait for Luo An to find her. On the other side, Luo An completely ignored the wild mandarin ducks who scolded him, and his footsteps kept shuttling through the woods at a fast speed. He soon ran out of the woods, and arrived at a road east of the park. Looking at the endless stream of vehicles on the road, and then looking at the several shops across the road, Luo An pondered for a few seconds, and turned back the same way. At the crime scene, Mona was sitting on a chair fiddling with a computer. When she saw Luo An, she raised her hand to indicate that she was here. When Luo An sat down, Mona asked, "How is it? Have you found any clues?" "Of course." Luo An smiled and nodded, saying, "The murderer should be a soldier who was unhappy with his life after retirement and came out to take jobs. He may even have retired from the special forces. Why? Because along the way I only found footprints of NYPD police officers and police dogs, and nothing else." Mona was speechless. She didn't expect Luo An to say so righteously that he didn't find any clues. But Luo An said that not finding any clues was the biggest clue. "The place I just walked by is the most suitable place to escape after killing someone. There are countless branches in the woods. Anyone who passes by will inadvertently break a few branches, but I just checked carefully. Where the branches were newly broken, there were either police dog footprints, or police dog footprints and police boots footprints. There were no newly broken branches in other places, and no obvious footprints. Only those in the special forces can have this kind of anti-reconnaissance awareness." After listening to Luo An's explanation, Mona stopped fiddling with the computer and tilted her head in confusion. Did she attend a fake FBI training academy? What's wrong? Nothing. Seeing Luo An asking her, Mona shook her head, pushed the laptop in her hand to Luo An, and said, "This is the autopsy report that has just been sent over. It shows that there is a small amount of alcohol in the stomach of the deceased. Did the deceased drink alcohol before he died?" Luo An was immediately delighted when he saw the report, and tilted his head and asked, "How many bars are there in the south of the park? Can you find them out? Why is it in the south?" Mona took the computer and asked while searching for relevant information quickly with her fingers. "Because the deceased walked from the south of the park, I guess." Hearing Roan's words, Mona curled her lips, and after a few seconds, she finished searching and showed the screen to Roan. "There are only 2 bars in the nearby block, and more a few blocks away. Okay, let's go to these 2 bars first. Anyway, we have plenty of time." "No, we only have 3 days." No one in the bar on the left side of the block had seen the deceased Mike, so Roan and Mona turned and walked towards the bar on the right. "Have you seen this person?" Seeing the photo in Mona's hand, the bar owner shook his head. "He is not a regular customer of our bar. I didn't see this person yesterday." Mona looked up at Roan, and Roan turned to look at the beautiful waitress who was chatting with someone on the side. Seeing this, the bar owner shouted and called the waitress over. The waitress with long red hair and a protruding front came over, and her eyes lit up when she saw Roan's face. "Hello, just call me Christine." Although she said hello, the waitress' eyes were only on Roan. Mona rolled her eyes and handed the photo to Christine, blocking her view of Roan. "Have you seen this person?" Christine was not angry, even though her view was blocked. She gave Roan a wink, took the photo and said directly, "I have seen him. This person came to our bar yesterday and ordered 2 glasses of red wine. He sat in the corner and looked like he was waiting for someone. But no one came in the end, so he drank the 2 glasses of red wine by himself and left." Hearing this, Mona's mouth twitched, and she subconsciously looked at Roan. She didn't expect that Mike actually walked into the park from the south before his death. Luo An didn't see Mona's expression. When he learned that Christine had seen the deceased Mike, he hurriedly asked, "Did anyone come in after he left? Or is there anyone looking for him? Is there a reward for answering this question?" Luo An was speechless. Mona snorted coldly, patted Luo An on the shoulder, and said to her, as long as the information you provide is useful, this man will be yours tonight. Then it's settled. Christine smiled and stuffed a note into Luo An's arms, and then said, there was an old man sitting at the bar. After the man in the photo left the bar, he also left the bar. Luo An instantly turned around and looked at the bar owner. Do you have surveillance cameras here? Christine glanced at the bar owner with disdain when she heard this, and her tone was very unhappy. There is only one, and it's facing the cash register. It's mainly because they are afraid that we will steal money. Christine. The bar owner was a little embarrassed, and Christine didn't care about him. He lowered his head and took out a dozen notes from his pocket. After searching for a while, he took out one of them and handed it to Luo An, shrugged. This is the old man's contact information. Seeing Ron and Mona looking at her in surprise, Christine put her hands on her hips and puffed out her chest, looking like a mountain peak. Who is she looking down on? I'll wait for you tonight, handsome guy. Christine stood behind the door of the bar and waved to Ron and the other man who were leaving the bar. Ron silently put the note into his pocket while Mona sat in the car and used her laptop to access the FBI internal network to search for the identity information of the owner of the phone number. I found it. Soon, the computer showed who the owner of the phone number was. The owner of the phone number is West Watts, 56 years old, a professor at New York University, living in Scarsdale. His wife just passed away half a year ago. The cause of death is cancer. University professor? Hearing Mona's introduction, Ron, who was sitting in the driver's seat, rubbed his temples and felt a little headache. Did I analyze it wrong? To be honest, I don't think your analysis is correct. Except that the deceased did enter the park from the south. Mona continued to look down at the information in the computer and said, let's go to West's house first and catch him first. Okay. Ron nodded, started the car, and turned around to leave the bar. There was only the sound of Mona typing in the car. Ron felt that the atmosphere was a little awkward. Just when he was about to say something, Mona's body suddenly shook and shouted, Fouquet. West died in a car accident. Please recommend. Please read. Chapter 6. Silencing the witness. Mona's shout was so sudden that Ron almost threw the steering wheel out of his wits. The next second, Ron reacted and turned around to ask, what? When did he die? How did he die? Mona looked down at the computer and spoke quickly. I just hacked into the NYPD's internal network and wanted to locate West's location. It turned out that West had a car accident at an intersection in downtown Queens 10 minutes ago and died on the spot. But the NYPD found bomb ingredients in the car's tires. 10 minutes ago. Ron's pupils shrank suddenly, and Mona also thought of something. The two looked at each other and said in unison, murder to silence the witness. The other party acted so quickly. Hearing Mona's clacking keyboard, Ron turned the car around and drove towards Queens. He rubbed his temple with his left hand and felt a little tricky about the mastermind behind the scenes. The car passed two intersections. Luo An seemed to have thought of something and suddenly stopped the car on the side of the road. He turned to look at Mona and said in a deep voice, Mona, is there a possibility that West is not the murderer who killed Mike, but the person Mike wanted to wait for in the bar? Huh. Hearing this, Mona's hands that were typing on the keyboard paused and suddenly came to her senses. She continued to analyze Luo An's words. Mike wanted to meet West to talk about something, but West was worried that Mike was being followed and that the bar was not safe. So he did not meet Mike in the bar, but waited for Mike to leave the bar and then found a place to contact him. That's right. Luo An nodded and continued, it is obvious that the anti-tracking technology of both of them is not good, and in the end they were both seen by the murderer. The murderer killed Mike in the park last night, but did not find what he wanted, so he killed West again today. As he spoke, Luo An suddenly clapped his hands. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he hurriedly tilted his head and asked, Mona, are there West's car keys at the scene of the car accident? Car keys? Mona was confused, but subconsciously started typing on the keyboard. After a few seconds, she looked up and replied, no, the New York Police Department did not find the car keys. I knew it. Luo An laughed, started the car, turned around in the street, and rushed in another direction. Mona, who was sitting in the passenger seat, felt very uncomfortable due to the inertia brought by the car turning. Seeing that the direction the car was heading was not the place where the accident happened, she hurriedly asked, "Hey, Luo An, where are you going?" "To West's house." Hearing Luo An's somewhat excited answer, Mona thought for a few seconds and suddenly realized men's car keys are usually hung together with their own front door keys. "That's right." Luo An nodded, and after crossing the traffic light, he began to step on the accelerator. The murderer must not have found what he wanted on West's body or in the car, so he can only look for it in West's house. If we are fast enough, maybe we can catch the real murderer in a while. Seeing the house receding rapidly outside the car window, and then seeing the car under her seat moving left and right in the traffic and moving fast, Mona swallowed her saliva, and the hand that was typing on the computer silently changed to grab the seat belt, turned her head and said, "Luo An, there is no need to be so anxious. If something happens, even if you are the FBI, your driver's license will be revoked." Luo An laughed, stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, and said confidently, "Don't worry, I don't have a driver's license. They can't revoke my license." WTF. Haha, just kidding. Squeak. On a road in Scarsdale, a dark SUV suddenly braked and stopped next to a two-story villa. Mona put on a bulletproof vest and walked down from the passenger seat with a Glock 19 in hand. She turned around and saw Luo An wearing a helmet and fully armed. The corner of her mouth twitched, but she still nodded and gestured. The two walked towards the door of the villa together. Luo An walked up the steps with a gun in both hands. Looking through the glass window, he found that there was no trace of anyone in the house. Seeing Mona looking at him waiting for action, he did not hesitate and kicked the door open with one foot, shouting, "FBI, open up." Bang, the house was quiet, as if no one was there. Mona looked at the broken door under Luo An's feet and didn't know what to say, but she still leaned against the gun with her hand and followed Luo An's footsteps to search every room in the villa as quickly as possible. Safe. Safe. After confirming that no one was in the villa, Mona began to check the house carefully, only to see magazines, coffee, books and other sundries on the ground. It was obvious that the murderer was one step ahead of them. Not only did he find the things and leave, but he also messed up the villa in an attempt to confuse the people who came here to investigate. Mona began to contact the leader of the number 5 investigation team, hoping that he would send someone to search the house for clues. Luo An frowned when he saw the broken glass windows in the kitchen and the seasonings on the stairs. Something is wrong. Huh. Seeing Mona puzzled, Luo An did not hesitate to put on his helmet again and drew his gun. While walking slowly towards the back door, he muffled his voice. "The murderer hasn't gone far. The things in the house seem to be deliberately messed up, but in fact, the other party left in a hurry. Who would scatter the seasonings everywhere? He must have seen our car and made a mistake in a hurry." Mona nodded and followed closely with a pistol. Slowly opening the back door of the villa, Luo An turned and rushed out, but there were no pedestrians on the road, only a few cars parked on the side of the road. "Roan." Mona tilted her head to look at Roan. Roan made a gesture, holding a gun in both hands and slowly walked towards the nearest golden Chevrolet, shouting loudly, "FBI. Roll down the window. Put your hands on the steering wheel. Let me see your hands." "Okay. Okay. Don't shoot." The car window slowly opened, and a white girl in a suspender skirt appeared in front of the two. Roan took a quick look and found that there was only a girl in the Chevrolet. Mona was relieved to see this. It shouldn't be her. Roan and Mona looked at each other and understood each other's thoughts. Roan took a step back and Mona put away her gun and prepared to make a simple inquiry to the girl. At this moment, the black Ford not far in front of the golden Chevrolet suddenly started. Roan raised his gun and was about to shout at the other party, but the Ford owner reacted faster. The window fell halfway and he didn't even look at Roan's position. He stretched out his pistol and pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. "Get down." Roan pushed Mona to the ground, pulled out the front door of the golden Chevrolet to block himself, and ignored the passionate high-pitched singing of the girl in suspenders beside him. Roan switched the Glock 18 to the burst mode and pulled the trigger in the direction of the black Ford. Bang, 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 bang. Roan's shooting skills were very accurate. The bullets not only hit the left hand and wrist of the Ford owner holding the gun, knocking the gun in his hand to the ground, but also several bullets passed through the rear glass and shot out, grazing his scalp, scaring the Ford owner into a cold sweat. Fouquet. After a few loud curses, the Ford owner no longer hesitated and didn't care whether the front of the car turned in place. He stepped on the accelerator and rushed towards the main road. Seeing this, Roan decisively aimed at the right rear wheel of the Ford. Bang! The gunshot rang out, and the next second, the Ford, which was originally moving straight, immediately swayed on the road, and it didn't last long before it crashed into the trash can on the side of the road. Please read it. Please recommend. Chapter 7. Finding someone to take the blame. Are you okay? Seeing the Ford smashing the trash can next to the street, Roan turned around to check on Mona and the girl in suspenders. I'm fine. Mona was just covered in dust and was not injured, but the girl in suspenders had several scratches on her shoulders and back because she was sitting in the driver's seat when the shooting happened and did not have time to get out. It's good that you are not injured. Roan automatically blocked the swear words of the girl in suspenders, threw a look at Mona to indicate that she should solve the trouble of the girl, and then he picked up the gun and slowly walked towards the black Ford car that was integrated with the trash can. As Roan expected, the cab of the black Ford car was empty. Roan walked around the car and did not find anything wrong, so he began to search the car for useful clues. A minute later, Mona came over and said to Luo An with a smile, "She is just a little girl who skipped classes from school without telling her parents. I have chased her away." Are you sure? Thinking of the anklet of the girl in suspenders, Luo An shook his head and didn't investigate further. Instead, he handed the vehicle registration certificate he found in the car to Mona and said, "The owner's name is on it. How about it? Can you find out the other party's identity? It will only take 3 minutes." Mona gave Luo An a believe me look, turned around to get the laptop in the SUV, and patted Luo An on the shoulder before leaving. "You actually found the murderer. You are so lucky. I'm also lucky." It was said to be 3 minutes, but in fact it was less than 2 minutes. After a crackling sound of keyboard, Mona turned the computer screen and motioned Luo An to check the information he had found. Conrad Cutler, male, 40 years old, former Marine Corps scout. Seeing that the photo in the computer looked the same as the person who shot him, Roan clapped his hands. "I said the murderer must be a veteran." "Yeah." Mona nodded helplessly, took the computer back, and asked seriously, "What are you going to do next? The two of us can definitely not beat each other." "No, it's you who can't beat each other." Roan shook his head and said something that made Mona grit her teeth, then took out his cell phone before the other party had an attack and said, "Call the superiors first and ask them to issue a wanted order for Conrad Cutler." Why? Mona was puzzled. Wouldn't issuing a wanted order let the trainee detectives from other groups know the identity of the murderer? 2 reasons. Mona. Roan took out his cell phone from his pocket, and his mouth twitched when he saw the brick-like Nokia, but he still explained to Mona, "First, we are now in the town of Scarsdale, which is a well-known wealthy area in New York. A dangerous murderer is hiding in this area. If something really happens, we 2 trainee agents cannot bear the wrath of the FBI's top brass. So we must report this matter. If something goes wrong, it will also be a headache for the top brass." Hearing Roan's words, Mona was a little surprised and turned her head to look at Roan carefully, as if she knew him for the first time. Second point. Roan finally found August's phone number in the Nokia's address book and continued, "As long as the FBI issues a wanted order, there will be more or less a reward. We can get more money if we catch him." Hearing that there might be money, Mona's eyes lit up instantly. In a meeting room on the 23rd floor of the Jacob Federal Office Building, August, the leader of the 5th Investigation Team, was meeting with other investigation team leaders and the team supervisor Verines. Beep, beep, beep. Hearing the phone ringing on his waist, Augustus turned around and left the meeting room without hesitation. The team supervisor and other investigation team leaders glanced at Augustus and didn't care. This was the norm for each team leader. When they were contacted with a case, they naturally needed to answer the phone quickly, even if they were in a meeting. But the next second Augustus's loud voice penetrated the wall and entered their ears. "What? You found the murderer now?" When the leader of the #1 investigation team, Luo An, heard Augustus' words, he subconsciously felt something was wrong. Could it be the case of Roan Greenwood? But thinking of the trainee detective's office he passed by before the meeting, and saw those trainee detectives investigating the social relationships of the deceased and analyzing clues, Luo An shook his head and smiled. He must have thought too much. Bang! The door of the conference room was pushed open, and Augustus walked in, and said directly to the team leader Verinus, "I'm sorry, sir, I have a shooting case here that needs to be dealt with urgently." Verinus's face remained unchanged, and she asked in doubt, "Which shooting case? I don't remember you having such a small case as a shooting case. It's a test case for those trainee agents. I have a new trainee agent named Roan Greenwood under me. He just called me and said that he has found the murderer of the shooting and had an exchange of fire with the other party in the town of Scarsdale." Augustus still respected the team leader Verinus very much. There was no way the funds for the team's activities were in her hands. Hearing the other party's questions, Augustus immediately answered what she asked. The murderer is a veteran with strong abilities. He disappeared after losing a car. Because the murderer has a high awareness of anti-reconnaissance and is very good at hiding himself, trainee agent Roan Greenwood asked me to issue a reward for the murderer and urgently notify the residents in the Scarsdale area to pay attention to safety. Click. The pen in Brosnan's hand accidentally fell on the table. The Scarsdale area is a well-known wealthy area in New York. Verines closed the pen in her hand, leaned back in her chair, stared at Augustus, and said, "If someone is injured there, I will be very passive. Do you understand?" Yeah, Augustus nodded, indicating that he understood. "I will issue a reward, and at the same time, I will mobilize the SWAT tactical team to block and search the area." Seeing Verines nod with satisfaction, Augustus picked up the notebook on the table and turned to leave the meeting room. Intern Agent Roan Greenwood. Verines wrote down the name Augustus just said in the notebook. Brosnan, who saw this scene, twitched his eyes instantly. In the trainee agent's office, except for the two-person team of Roan and Mona, and the hospitalized duo of Fisher and Mackey, the rest of the trainee agents are basically here. Mike's wife didn't have time to commit the crime. Jody, who had stood with Fisher before, but was beaten by Roan, covered his right face with an ice pack, and said in a muffled voice, according to the interrogation records, she was attending a seminar in Los Angeles at the time of the crime. Everyone at the seminar can testify for him. Who are Mike's friends? Either reporters or congressmen, or senior executives of various companies, such as SYN, a partner of the Morroway Pharmaceutical Company. Just as this group of trainee detectives who had been beaten by Roan were analyzing the case one after another, Mediterranean pushed open the door and walked in, shouting, "Boys, you have a new mission. Go to the Scarsdale area to participate in the search operation." "What?" Jody stood up with an ice pack and asked puzzledly, "But sir, we haven't found the murderer of the shooting murder case yet." Mediterranean waved his hand to interrupt Jody and said directly, "The target of this manhunt is the murderer of the shooting murder case. In addition, the murderer's whereabouts were found by Luo An and Mona, so they have already received half of the 80 points. Who can get the remaining points depends on who is lucky enough to catch the murderer." WTF. Hearing Mediterranean's words, a burst of interjection starting with F suddenly rang out in the trainee agent's office. "Please collect. Please recommend. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 8, Stories in the Clinic. Scarsdale, 6 p.m. The burgers here look good. Mona sat back in the car with the burgers and coke she bought at the door of a fast food restaurant in the town, handed half to Roan, and said while eating, "What should we do next?" Roan led Mona to successfully find clues this afternoon, and discovered the murderer. The performance of the past few hours has completely established Roan's leading position in the two-person team. Mona also subconsciously asks Roan, when she is in doubt. After taking a big bite of the hamburger and taking a swig of coke, Roan started the car and began to turn the steering wheel. I just called Augustus, and he sent the information of the murderer Conrad Carter to various police stations in the New York area. The warrant for his arrest has been issued. Good. Mona's eyes sparkled, and she tilted her head and asked, how much is the reward? $5,000 US. But Augustus has already brought the SWAT team to the town of Scarsdale. Hearing the name of SWAT, Mona's face, which had been a little excited just now, suddenly calmed down. If they catch the murderer, then this money, it will definitely have nothing to do with us. Roan swallowed the last bite of the hamburger, drank the Coke, turned the steering wheel and drove the SUV to the highway in the town. So we must catch Conrad before they get here. Wait a minute, Roan. After eating, Mona picked up the computer, and her smart IQ once again occupied the high ground. She turned her head and said worriedly, even if we find Conrad, we may not be able to catch him with just the two of us, right? According to the information, Conrad is a soldier with rich combat experience. Just like you said before, I don't want to die before I make any money. If we catch the murderer and solve the case, the two of us can get the $50,000 reward offered by the New York Journalists Association, and the $5,000 reward on the wanted poster. $27,500 each. Our monthly salary is only $2,000. Point after I get the money, I'm going to leave my shabby rental house in Brooklyn and move to a big apartment in Manhattan. Hearing Luo An's deep words, Mona tapped the keyboard fiercely with her hands. Tell me, where should we find Conrad next? Haha. Luo An stepped on the accelerator and drove the car to another road in the town, pointing to the packaged pistol that Conrad left at the scene of the firefight. During the previous firefight at the door of the villa, I shot Conrad's left hand, so that his pistol was picked up by us. Hearing what Roan said, Mona nodded and began to check the computer. Conrad will definitely find a place to stop the bleeding first, but the things in the family medicine box are obviously not enough to treat gunshot wounds, so he will most likely go to a private clinic in the town. That's right. Roan stepped on the accelerator and the SUV rushed out in an instant. The town of Scarsdale is not big, and there are only 2 private clinics. Roan and his companions quickly arrived at the one closest to them. Hello, FBI. Mona and the fully armed Roan walked into the clinic. Roan took out the FBI's golden badge and waved it in front of the pretty girl at the clinic's front desk and asked, have you received any patients with left-hand injuries this afternoon? No. The pretty girl was a little stunned, but she quickly reacted and answered, the clinic only received a girl with a back scratch this afternoon. Roan and Mona looked at each other and guessed who the girl the front desk was talking about. Just as they were about to continue asking, the door on the side of the front desk suddenly opened, and a middle-aged white doctor in a white coat came out holding the hand of a middle-aged white woman with a ruddy face and a lazy atmosphere everywhere. Roan and Mona looked at each other. They were both adults, and could tell at a glance what the other had just experienced. See you the day after tomorrow, Dr. Tim. The white woman, in a good mood, glanced at Roan and Mona, and ignored them. She threw a kiss to the doctor and turned around to walk towards the door of the clinic with her pet dog. See you the day after tomorrow, Ms. Yarland. Tim, wearing a white coat, nodded calmly. When the woman left, he turned his gaze to Luo An and the others and asked with a smile, what do you 2 agents want to do with me? Luo An ignored the trivial matter under his crotch and asked directly, did anything strange happen in your clinic this afternoon, such as missing medicines, camera failure, etc.? No, everything is normal in our clinic. Dr. Tim shook his head, saying that his clinic had never installed cameras for the sake of customer privacy. It's to make it easier for you to have an affair. Luo An was speechless. Just as he was about to ask the other party a few more questions, he suddenly heard the scream of Ms. Yarland outside. Where is my car? Who stole my car? Damn it, I will kill that car thief. Hearing the shout, Mona rushed out and asked the furious Ms. Yarland, ma'am, when did you come to the clinic? 40 minutes ago. Ms. Yarland, who was holding her pet dog, was very panicked. She grabbed Mona's arm and shook it hard. You guys hurry up and find my car. My husband is a Yale senator. I must find the car. Otherwise, I'm done. Hearing that the woman had come to the clinic 40 minutes ago, Luo An instantly thought of something and hurriedly turned to the owner of the clinic and asked, Doctor, take me to the pharmacy in your clinic now to see if anything is missing. No need to look, Mr. Agent. The expression on Dr. Tim's face was even more panicked than Ms. Yarland. The key to the pharmacy is lost. Fouquet. The other party played with Ms. Yarland in the ward for 40 minutes, and who knows when the pharmacy key was lost. Luo An cursed in a low voice, rushed out of the clinic, and ran to the SUV, but he didn't expect Mona to be waiting for him in the passenger seat. Don't worry, Luo An. Seeing the urgency on Luo An's face, Mona said calmly, while typing on the keyboard, I just asked about the model and license plate number of the car that Ms. Yarland lost, and then found that the other party's car is the latest Cadillac. So, Luo An didn't know much about cars, and didn't understand what Mona meant. The latest Cadillac has a satellite positioning system installed on every car for the safety of customers. Mona smiled calmly, and a lot of codes that Luo An couldn't understand popped up on the computer, while her fingers flew. A few seconds later, Mona hit the space bar, and a flashing and fast moving red dot appeared on the map. This is the highway north of the town of Scarsdale. Mona showed the computer screen to Ron and laughed. It seems that the other party hasn't run very far. I love you so much, Mona. Pulling you into my team is the best damn thing I have ever done. Ron laughed, turned the steering wheel, stepped on the accelerator and drove the SUV towards the direction of the red dot on the map. Please collect. Please read. Please recommend. Chapter 9. 4 consecutive explosions. There is a small forest to the north of the town of Scarsdale. It was already evening and the street lights on the road in the forest began to light up. Sir, this is Mona. The pitch black SUV shuffled quickly on the winding road. Mona silently suppressed her anxiety and was holding Ron's phone to report the current situation to August. On the other end of the phone, the murderer Conrad robbed the Cadillac of a congressman's wife and is currently fleeing on the road. We request the SWAT team to intercept him. The SWAT team will arrive in 10 minutes. August on the other end of the phone said calmly, in the riot car, but I have already notified the New York Police Department. They have sent the patrol officers closest to the target location to intercept the other party. You must be careful. Okay, sir. Mona hung up the phone, stuffed Ron's Nokia into her pocket, lowered her head, and continued to tap on the computer keyboard with a nervous look. What should we do next? I just checked Ms. Yarland's husband, Yale congressman. He is a staunch Republican in the New York area and a staunch gun supporter. He has stated many times in public that he carries a gun wherever he goes, including in the car. It's worthy of being America. Luo An was somewhat helpless, but he couldn't back down, since the situation was just around the corner, so he tilted his head and told Mona, put on your bulletproof vest, and be careful when you meet the enemy later. Okay. Mona nodded. She knew the importance of her own life. The SUV was speeding on the road. After turning a few corners, Luo An saw that he was getting closer and closer to the red dot on the computer, and suddenly there was a fierce exchange of gunfire outside. Bang, bang, bang. Luo An immediately stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, and the SUV climbed over the hill in front, and immediately saw the front of the car was broken, and hit the New York Police Department police car on both sides of the road. Not only that, there were 2 patrolmen on the ground giving emergency treatment to another patrolman, who was lying on the ground and was shot. Ron stepped on the brakes, and Mona hurriedly opened the car window and asked, what happened? A Cadillac forced its way through the temporary checkpoint we set up. One of the patrolmen said with lingering fear. When the other party rushed through the checkpoint, he took out a rifle and shot at us. Did you see what he looked like? A middle-aged white man. Okay, thank you for the news. Mona raised her hand and threw the emergency medical kit under the passenger seat to the 2 policemen, and Ron stepped on the accelerator and rushed out. Thanks to the help of Yale Senator, Conrad now has a rifle. Seeing Mona touching the bulletproof vest on her chest, Ron frowned. Hide in the back seat of the car. Okay. At the critical moment, Mona did not show off, picked up the computer, and stood up, and moved from the passenger seat to the back seat of the car. Seeing Mona sitting in the back seat of the car, and fastening her seatbelt, Luo An's eyes suddenly became sharp. It's time to race. Under the night, the lights on both sides of the forest road were brightly lit. Not far away was the brightly lit New York City. The nightlife of the big city had just begun. A powerful engine sound came from far away, and then the black lightning flashed quickly. The SUV was speeding on the road. Luo An sat in the driver's seat with a cold face, controlling the steering wheel with both hands, performing a fast overtaking that was 10 times crazier than before. Seeing the black SUV getting closer and closer to him through the rearview mirror, Conrad's heart was pounding with pain in his left hand. It was the first time he met someone driving like this on the winding road in the forest. Glancing at the rifle on the co-pilot, Conrad's heart sank. He turned the steering wheel and stepped on the brakes. The Cadillac left 2 deep ruts on the ground. The co-pilot pointed at the SUV. Conrad's face instantly became ferocious. He sat in the car, grabbed the rifle, and pulled the trigger at the car chasing him. Go to hell. Bang 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 bang. Roan. The other side is shooting. The gunshots rang out. Mona screamed in fear. Roan turned the steering wheel with a serious face to dodge. The SUV was like a spirit snake running on the forest road, winding and winding at the same speed, getting closer and closer to the Cadillac. In Conrad's extremely shocked eyes, the SUV with several bullet holes on the window, but the driver was unharmed, hit the right side of the Cadillac heavily. Boom. Are you crazy? Roan. Mona in the backseat of the car cursed. Bend down and don't move. At the moment, when the other party was hit and was stunned, Roan injured the discomfort of his body, picked up a stun grenade from his waist, and threw it into the backseat of the Cadillac. Stun grenades are non-lethal weapons, mainly using huge noise and strong light to make the enemy dizzy. Bang! A huge noise sounded inside the Cadillac, and the windows of the 2 cars instantly shattered and scattered all over the ground. Luo An bent down to avoid the explosion with his Glock 18 on the side of the SUV, and at the same time, pulled Mona out of the car and pulled her behind him. He looked up and saw that there was no one in the driver's seat of the Cadillac. He realized that the other party had just jumped out of the car and was not hurt by the center of the stun grenade, so Luo An picked up another stun grenade without saying a word and threw it over. Bang! The stun grenade exploded again on the other side of the Cadillac. Luo An tilted his head and thought about it, but still felt unsafe, so he threw all the remaining 4 stun grenades in his pocket over. Bang, 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 bang. 4 consecutive explosions sounded, and Luo An felt much more at ease. He stood up and rushed to the side of the Cadillac with his Glock 18 and found that Conrad had been knocked to the ground by the stun grenade and was completely unable to move. Carefully kicking the rifle away, Luo An took out handcuffs and handcuffed Conrad's hands and feet, and then he breathed a sigh of relief. Start to search the body. No, check if there are any hidden weapons on the other party's body. Mona, who was covered in dirt, walked carefully to the side of the Cadillac with a pistol in hand. She was relieved to see that the enemy was handcuffed and Luo An was unharmed, but she was still furious when she thought of the car crash just now. After putting away the gun, she hit Luo An's arm hard. You are really a lunatic. Luo An, I told you before that you should believe in my driving skills. Luo An waved his hand and put the yellow notebook he touched into his pocket. In his previous life, he drove a light van on the winding mountain road and never lost. If he hadn't had a mission at that time, he would have gone to the international competition to compete with others. This is not a question of driving skills, this is a question of life safety. Just when Mona was about to give Luo An a good lecture, Luo An's nose moved slightly and suddenly covered her mouth. Luo An's face was solemn. He took out his Glock 18 and pointed at the trunk of the Cadillac. Mona understood instantly and immediately took out her pistol and aimed at the trunk. The 2 stood on either side of the trunk. Luo An counted down to 3 with his fingers. Mona nodded and got ready. Bang, the countdown ended. Luo An suddenly opened the trunk, and Mona immediately raised her pistol to the trunk. A dying girl appeared in front of the 2. Please collect. Please recommend. Chapter 10 Team Leader Variants. It's the girl in the sling, but why is she here? Luo An recognized the other party's identity at a glance, and hurriedly put away his gun to check the other party's condition. He found that the girl was shot in the shoulder, and excessive blood loss was the main reason for her coma. Mona saw the pale face and the increasingly rapid breathing of the girl, and she was extremely anxious. She subconsciously looked at Luo An. I remember she left before. What should I do? I just threw the emergency medicine box to the patrolman on the mountain. It's okay. Luo An's eyes moved slightly, and he said in a deep voice, she is in a condition that is not suitable for moving. You drive back to the patrolman immediately to get the medicine box. I'll call the nearby hospital here and ask them to send an ambulance here quickly. Okay. Mona nodded, put away her gun, and hurriedly drove the sub without glass back along the original route. Seeing that the shadow of the sub had completely disappeared, Luo An first called the hospital to ask them to send an ambulance here quickly, and then turned around to confirm that Conrad was still unconscious. Only then did he feel relieved and opened the light blue system page and took out the bottle of hemostatic medicine. This was the first time that Ron used the potion prescribed by the system. The potion was placed in a small square transparent glass bottle that was 5 centimeters high. The whole thing was red. He opened the bottle cap and smelled it. There was no smell. Seeing that it was written on the glass bottle that it was for oral use, Ron opened the girl's mouth and poured the entire bottle of potion into it. A few seconds later, the wound on the girl's shoulder had not healed, but it had stopped bleeding. A moment later, Mona drove back in Suv. Ron snatched the emergency medical kit from her hand before she got out of the car. When Mona got out of the car and walked to the girl, Ron had almost bandaged the girl. Mona didn't think much about it, just thinking that Ron was in a hurry to save the girl's life. By the way, Mona. After wrapping the girl's wound with a bow, Ron turned around and smiled at Mona and asked, "Do you want to go to which investigation team after you get better and become a formal agent?" An hour later, Ron and Mona returned to the 23rd floor of the Jacob Federal Building. At this time, the office of the trainee detective was brightly lit and bustling. The trainee detectives who had gone out for nothing all looked at Luo An and Mona, who were sitting at the front of the office, whispering to each other with envy. According to the relevant regulations of the internship period, after the trainee detective solves a case, he needs to tell the whole process of solving the case to several senior detectives in charge of the trainee detectives. After listening, the senior detectives will ask questions and give scores based on the performance of the trainee detectives. This score determines which position the trainee detective will work in the investigation team after he is converted to a regular employee, such as a technical detective who searches for information, a field detective who runs field work, etc. It means they were just luckier than us and found the clues to the murderer before us. Jody, who was standing in Fisher's position but was beaten by Ron, took a sip of the coffee handed over by his teammate, looked at Ron and Mona and said disdainfully, "I heard that they destroyed a car provided by the headquarters when they arrested people this time. I wonder how the team leader will punish them later. It must be a salary deduction." The trainee agent wearing glasses sitting next to Jody smiled. "I asked. They destroyed the latest SUV of our criminal investigation department. Think about the rumors outside about the team leader variants. You mean stingy? Ahem." At this point, the two looked at each other and laughed together, waiting to see the show. The team leader they mentioned was named Varians, the immediate superior of the leaders of the number 1 to number 5 investigation teams, and the woman who held the funds for the 5 investigation teams. The female trainee agent Elena, who heard the entire conversation between the two, looked at them with disdain. "You still have the nerve to say that others are lucky. Jody's team's ideas for finding the murderer are all wrong. Even if it wasn't Luo An and his team who found the real murderer, it definitely wasn't Coyote and his team either." Thinking of this, Elena cast her eyes to Luo An in the front. Her eyes gradually blurred, and she began to appreciate Luo An's handsome profile. Here we are. Here we are." The door of the office was pushed open, and the trainee detectives hurriedly stopped talking and began to sit upright, trying to leave a good impression on the senior detective who would listen to the case later. What these trainee detectives didn't expect was that although the one who pushed open the door of the office was the familiar Mediterranean senior detective, the first person to enter the office was actually the team leader Varians. "What? Team leader? Why is she here?" Seeing the team leader Varians, who was wearing a women's suit, had short hair, and an expressionless face, the trainee detective's office suddenly became buzzing. Behind Varians were the leaders of the 5 investigation teams. The 6 of them sat at the front of the office, and the Mediterranean senior detective who was responsible for listening to the case had no place to sit at this time, so he could only stand at the side of the office. As one of the parties involved in the case, Mona was also a little confused. She didn't understand why this was just a small murder case, so she attracted the attention of the team leader. After she couldn't figure out the reason, she subconsciously looked at Luo An. Luo An actually didn't understand why he attracted the attention of his superior's superior, but he didn't care. He had to deal with it. He didn't do anything illegal. So he stood up decisively, smiled, and walked to the front of the office with Mona. Ignoring the number 1 team leader, Luo An, whose face was as black as the bottom of a pot, Luo An signaled Mona to put the materials on the laptop in front of the team leader Verines. After coughing twice, he smiled and said, "Good evening, superiors. I'm trainee agent Luo An, and this is my teammate, trainee agent Mona." After briefly introducing the time and place of death of the deceased and other relevant information, Luo An began to explain all the cases he solved after 12 o'clock today. First, they determined the murderer's escape route in the park, then found the bar that the deceased had visited before his death, based on the autopsy report, and learned the identity of the second person who followed the deceased. They followed the clues and ran into the murderer outside the stalker's villa. Finally, they fought with the murderer and finally succeeded in catching the real murderer after a desperate fight. Mona. This long experience stunned the trainee detectives, and several investigation team leaders also listened very attentively, including the leader of the number 1 investigation team, Bruce. Except for the team leader Verines. Seeing that Luo An had finished narrating his experience today, Verines opened the notebook in her hand with an expressionless face, and after a few seconds of silence, she asked, "The murderer Conrad is a veteran. Why did he kill war reporter Mike Robert and New York University professor West Watts? What was the reason?" Hearing Verines' question, everyone who was immersed in Luo An's story just now came back to their senses. That's right, Luo An just caught the murderer, but did not explain why the murderer did this. What was the reason? Personal grudge or old hatred? "Sorry, sir." Augustus on the side hurriedly winked at Roan, and then explained, "Roan is a trainee detective, and has no right to interrogate the murderer Conrad, so Roan can't answer your question, sir." Team leader number 1 Luo An smiled, and took over Augustus' words. Augustus's face instantly turned darker than the bottom of a pot. "Please recommend. Please collect." Chapter 11 The Truth. If a trainee detective wants to become a full-time detective, in addition to the appreciation and recommendation of the team leader, the most important thing is the signature of the team supervisor. Without the signature of the supervisor, even if you join a certain investigation team, you can only get the salary of a trainee detective. This is a matter of principle. In August's opinion, Luo An's performance today is remarkable. From noon to 7 o'clock in the evening, Luo An and Mona took only 7 hours to successfully catch the murderer. Although this efficiency did not break the New York branch's case-solving time record, it successfully broke the New York branch's trainee detective's case-solving time record. So in August's eyes, today's interrogation is not a problem at all. As long as Luo An's statement is reasonable and there are no principled mistakes, he can help Luo An solve some other problems, and finally let Luo An successfully become a full-time member of the number 5 investigation team. But he didn't expect Luo An to jump out. On the surface, Luo An was targeting Luo An, but in fact, it was targeting himself. Augustus's black face changed from matte black to frosted black, his eyes fixed on Bruce. His tone unchanged. "Roan is a trainee agent, and he has done everything a trainee agent should do. Does Captain Bruce think that a trainee agent should do better than you?" Hearing this, Bruce's tone did not change, and he still smiled and said, "No, I'm just saying something for you. Why are you so angry?" "Papa." Team supervisor Verines picked up a signature pen and knocked on the table, turning a blind eye to the tit-for-tat between the two team leaders, looking up at Roan, and asked again expressionlessly, "So you don't know why the murderer Conrad committed the crime, right?" Augustus hurriedly winked at Roan, asking him to just nod directly. As he said, Roan has done everything a trainee agent should do, and he has not made any principled mistakes. The transfer is a done deal, and there is no need to say more. The more you talk, the more mistakes you make, and the less you talk, the fewer mistakes you make. This applies everywhere. "No, I know why the murderer committed the crime." Giving Augustus a reassuring look, Roan reached out to Mona, who immediately handed him a yellow notebook. "Please look, everyone. This is the reporter Mike's notes. that I got from the murderer Conrad. It records the important reasons why Conrad killed Mike and West. The smile on Browson's face slowly disappeared. Half a year ago, the wife of New York University Professor West Watts died painfully one night after more than 3 years of cancer torture. West sorted out his wife's belongings with a heavy heart. During this process, he suddenly found a small bottle of white medicine without a label, name, or brand mark. West remembered that this bottle of medicine was the anti-cancer medicine that his wife had to take every day in the ward for nearly a year. But according to regulations, the name and mark of the medicine must be written on the pills of anti-cancer medicine. Puzzled, West called the hospital and asked which company produced this bottle of medicine and what the efficacy was. As a result, the doctor on the other end of the phone didn't know anything about it. In the end, he said that he had never prescribed the medicine in West's hand and then hung up the phone. West was completely furious. His wife had been taking the white medicine for a whole year, and now you tell me that you have never prescribed this medicine? Where did this medicine come from? Is my wife's painful death related to this medicine? With a series of angry questions, West began to investigate the source of this bottle of white medicine. After much hardship, West finally learned that this medicine came from the Whirlwind pharmaceutical company and was one of the anti-cancer drugs studied by this company. At present, this drug is still in the clinical testing and experimental stage, with high side effects and a high probability of causing death. Using only mice cannot quickly advance the testing progress. In order to speed up the drug development and make the company go public quickly, the person in charge of this company decisively chose to buy off the senior management of several hospitals and feed these drugs to cancer patients in the hospital, and speed up the drug development by observing the reactions of these patients after taking the medicine. Naked biological experiment. And Professor West's wife was naturally among these experimental subjects. After learning the cause and effect, Professor West was knocked out by the truth and fainted for a day and a night. If it weren't for the students visiting his home, he might have lived in the small box in a few days. After waking up in the hospital, West's first thought was to expose the company's ugly behavior and show their deeds to the world. After much inquiry, West found the war correspondent Mike, hoping that he could expose the whole thing. Mike agreed to West's request, but words were not enough, and the two needed more strong evidence, so they began to collect evidence by their own means. In the process of collecting evidence, Mike's action was a bit big, and was discovered by a senior executive of Whirlwind Pharmaceuticals. In order to prevent this matter from being exposed, and for the company to be successfully listed, the senior executive immediately contacted the veteran Conrad, and bought Mike and West from the world for $500,000. Very good. After hearing the truth behind this matter, Verine's mouth corners slightly raised, and after a simple comment to Roan, she stood up from her seat, and said to Augustus on the side, "I'm leaving first, and I'll leave the rest to you." After that, Verines turned and left. "Goodbye, sir." Augustus laughed, grabbed the pen on the table, and threw it aside, hitting Bruce's head. Before Bruce got angry, Augustus said, "Sorry, I got up too quickly, and my hands are shaking." After glaring at Augustus, Bruce turned and left with a dark face. Until Bruce's figure completely left the trainee agent's office, Augustus laughed and walked to the front of the office, looked up and down at Luo An, and praised, "Well done, Kit, you look a bit like me when I was young. Even your appearance is almost the same as mine." Mona. Everyone. Looking at Augustus's big belly, thick lips and big black face, Luo An didn't know whether Augustus was praising him or scolding him. But it didn't matter. "Sir, I damaged a car during the mission." As soon as Luo An opened his mouth, Augustus waved his hand and said, "It's okay. It will be deducted from the funds of our number 5 investigation team." "Thank you, sir." Trainee agent Jody and his teammate's eyes instantly turned red. By the way, speaking of the car problem, Augustus suddenly remembered something and said directly to Mediterranean, who was standing beside him, "The case has been solved. You must immediately arrest the senior executives of Whirlwind Pharmaceutical Company involved in the case. You must not let them get the news and run away from America in advance." "Okay, sir." Mediterranean nodded and agreed, then pointed at Jody and said, "Jody, your team should arrest them immediately. Don't let the senior executives of that company run away." Jody's team. So all the credit goes to Luo An and his team, and the miscellaneous work behind is ours? Exclamation mark. Please collect. Please recommend. Chapter 12. New York has its own city love. After a busy night, Jody and others were about to find a place to sleep when they suddenly learned a new piece of news. Roan was successfully promoted to a full-time agent. The reward for solving the case and the reward for the murderer totaled $55,000, which would be paid out together with Roan's salary this weekend. If this news made Jody and other male agents jealous and unwilling, then another piece of news made Alina and other female agents unable to hold back. Because of Roan's strong request, Augustus, the leader of the 5th team, also promoted Mona to a full-time agent, and at the same time, transferred her to the 5th investigation team. And Mona's share of the $55,000 was also included. Fouquet. Bitch. Asterisk 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 we both have 2 legs. What's the difference between me and Mona? Compared with men, the fight between women is more intense and terrifying. Roan had no idea of the mentality of Jody and other trainee agents. He and Mona finally got off work after chatting with Augustus in the office area of the 5th investigation team. After saying goodbye to Mona, he took a taxi back to the small apartment he rented in Queens. A kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a living room. Luo An took a quick look around. The apartment was a bit messy, with clothes that needed to be changed scattered all over the floor. There was also a musty smell in the air that was familiar to all boys. Luo An looked around and found that the source of the smell was the unwashed smelly socks under the sofa. Fortunately, I didn't invite Mona to my house. Feeling that his predecessor was really careless, Luo An opened the window to keep the air flowing in the room, and then began to search for important items related to his predecessor without cleaning the room. The reason was simple. Luo An didn't plan to live in this apartment. In addition to the fact that the apartment was too far from his workplace, and he had to get up early to take the subway to work, because he didn't have a car, there was another important reason. That is, this apartment would expire in 2 days. Walking into the bedroom, Luo An found an old-fashioned computer with a big butt. It showed that it had been turned on for a long time. He flipped through it briefly, but didn't find the information he was looking for. He got up and flipped under the bed again, and finally found something very important to his predecessor, a passbook. Seeing the huge sum of $500 on it, Luo An put it into his arms expressionlessly. No matter how much money is, it is meat. The old killer once warned Luo An, don't underestimate every penny. Sometimes a life is not worth a penny. After carefully checking the memories in his mind in the house and making sure that there was nothing missing, Luo An called the landlord and left the apartment. From then on, Luo An Greenwood is Luo An Greenwood. At the Nether Watson Hotel in Manhattan, Luo An took a simple shower, did not call the waitress, and lay on the bed to go to sleep. It was the first day of the crossing, and he was still a little uncomfortable. After running around all day, Luo An was really in no mood to play a 2-player game. After a long time, Luo An, who had fallen asleep, suddenly heard a buzzing sound in his ear. Before he could react, a familiar light blue page appeared in front of him again. Luo An glanced at the time, 12 o'clock at midnight. So the treasure chest is refreshed at 12 o'clock every day, right? Stretching, Luo An yawned and began to check the system page. Yesterday's performance evaluation. Good. Number of treasure chests obtained. 3. Do you want to open the treasure chest? Point open. Seeing the word good in the evaluation, Luo An's eyes lit up. Since there is a good, there must be an excellent. But on second thought, there shouldn't be a pass or a fail. Treasure chest has been opened. Physical strength potion X1. Fireproof potion X1. Night vision potion X1. Seeing the 3 potions opened on the light blue system page, Luo An thought of the hemostatic potion he used on the sling girl during the day. The effect was immediate and could save his life at a critical moment. However, after putting the pillow down and lying down again, Luo An closed his eyes and whispered, why do I feel that the effects of these potions are more suitable for going the killer's way? At 8 o'clock the next morning, Luo An carried a lot of breakfast and walked into the number 5 investigation team office on the 23rd floor of the Jacob Federal Office Building. As mentioned before, the 23rd to 26th floors of the Jacob Federal Office Building in Manhattan are the territory of the FBI New York branch. These 4 floors are occupied by several major departments of the FBI New York branch, including the Homeland Security Division, the Crime Cyber Response and Services Division, the Science and Technology Division, the Intelligence Division, the Information and Technology Processing Division, and the Human Resources Division. Under the Crime Cyber Response and Services Division, there are 5 major departments: the Criminal Investigation Division, the Major Incident Response Team, the Cyber Division, the International Business Division, and the Victim Services Division. Among them, the Major Incident Response Team includes the well-known Hostage Rescue Team HRT, the Special Weapons and Tactics Team SWAT, the Crisis/Hostage Negotiation Team CUN, the Behavioral Analysis Unit BAU, and the last Anti-Improvised Explosive Device Division. Of course, these departments have nothing to do with Luo An. The investigation team number 5 he came to today is affiliated with the Criminal Investigation Department and is one of the 13 investigation teams under the Criminal Investigation Department. Don't ask why there are 13 investigation teams. The answer is that New York has its own city. The team leader Verines is mainly responsible for matters related to the investigation teams 1 to 5. As for the 6th and later, other team leaders are responsible. The specific scope of work of these investigation teams is very wide. They can participate in the investigation of crimes such as mass killings, sniper murders, serial killings, gangs, crimes against children, human trafficking/involuntary servitude, bank robberies, jewelry and gem theft, international violent crimes, etc. Good morning, Mr. Agent. Luo An walked into the door of the number 5 investigation team office and found that there was only one person in the room. The other party was a white strong man who was no less than 1.9 meters tall, had a short haircut, and muscles that seemed to be able to blow up the suit. Hearing someone talking to him, the white sturdy man moved his eyes away from the computer, turned around and saw the handsome Luo An, grinning. "It seems that you are the Luo An that Augustus mentioned." "Yes, it's me." Luo An handed the other party a portion of the breakfast in his hand and asked with a smile, "I wonder what Augustus said about me?" The white sturdy man took the breakfast and without hesitation, he bit off most of it in one bite and smiled vaguely. "Augustus told us that Luo An is not only as handsome as him, but also has a similar brain. But he is not as skilled as him. He hopes that we will give you some leeway, not bully you, and protect you more during the mission." Luo An. Seeing the stiff expression on Luo An's face, the white sturdy man finished his breakfast in a few bites and said directly, "Don't worry, everyone in our number 5 investigation team knows that Luo An, you fought 10 people alone and solved the case in 8 hours yesterday. No one will be blind and bully you." "No, I'm not afraid of anyone bullying me." Luo An shook his head and spread his hands. "I was just wondering, after Augustus's propaganda, what do those who have never met me, but have met Augustus think of me?" Hearing this, the white man laughed, slapped Roan on the shoulder and said, "My name is Ridley Smith, a senior agent of the number 5 investigation team. You can just call me Ridley from now on." After saying that, Ridley took the bag of breakfast, took out 3 more packs of breakfast and started eating. Roan. Please collect. Please recommend. Chapter 13. To get ahead, you need power and background. You bought too much, man. Riyad ate 5 packs of breakfast in one breath, drank a sip of coffee, and then said to Roan, who was wiping the desk not far away, "Our number 5 investigation team has just been established. Augustus is a team leader. Lassie and I are senior agents responsible for field work. 5 office agents responsible for technical support, plus you and the new little girl. There are only 10 people in total. Other investigation teams start with 20 people. It's my first day, so it's normal not to know these things." After wiping his own desk clean, Roan sat down on the chair, pointed to the empty office, and then pointed to the clock at the front of the office, and asked in confusion, "It's already 8:30. Why are there only 2 of us in the office?" "Because Augustus won't come to work before 9 o'clock. If he doesn't come, there's no need for us to come too early." It wasn't Riyad who answered. The door of the office area was pushed open, and a white woman in a casual suit, with a curvy figure, long brown hair, and blurry eyes walked in. Seeing the breakfast on the table, the woman's eyes lit up. She picked up a piece and started eating. Then she closed her eyes and explained to Luo An, "Thank you for the breakfast, Luo An." Luo An was very surprised to see the woman fall asleep on the table while eating. Is she also from the number 5 investigation team? He tilted his head to look at Riyadh. Riyadh shook his head and walked to Luo An and whispered, "She is the senior agent lassie I just told you about. She is a lesbian. Judging from the situation, she should have gone to a bar in Manhattan to hunt for beauties last night." Luo An was silent for a moment, tilted his head and asked, "The consumption in bars in Manhattan is not low. The salary of senior agents is so little. Where does she get the money?" Luo An only wants to make money. Other things have nothing to do with him. Hearing Luo An's question, Riyadh was silent for a moment and said with a distorted expression, "Lassie never spends money when she goes out to play. It's those women who spend money for her." Luo An, "It seems that I can try it myself." Time slowly came to about 8:50 and people finally began to enter the office one after another. After receiving the breakfast, everyone's favorable impression of Luo An increased by 10. Looking up at Luo An's ordinary handsome face, the favorable impression instantly increased by 50. So when Augustus brought Mona into the office area, he was very surprised because he found that everyone in the office was chatting happily with Luo An. Except for Lassie, she was still sleeping. It seems that everyone knows the number 1 newcomer Luo An. He slapped the table hard to wake Lassie up. Augustus stood at the front of the office and pointed to Mona on his right and said, "This is our number 2 newcomer official agent Mona. We will work together in the future." Crackling, a round of applause sounded, and Augustus waved his hand to signal everyone to do what they should do, and then called Luo An and Mona to the team leader's office. "Here are your 2 regularization documents." Sitting behind his desk, Augustus threw 2 folders to the 2 of them, motioning them to sign their names, and then continued, "After the Park murder case was solved, the New York Journalists Association's bonus and the reward for the murderer totaled $55,000, which will be paid out together with your salary this weekend. You 2 can discuss how to divide it then." "Thank you, sir." Ron and Mona looked at each other and saw the joy in each other's eyes. Seeing that Ron was not so happy to hear the news of his regularization, Augustus curled his lips, took out another file from under the desk, and said, "Last night, when I was entering Conrad's identity information, I accidentally discovered that he was also related to the murder of a state senator a few years ago. He also killed that state senator." Ron was stunned for a moment, and then thought of something, with a surprised expression. "I told you that your brain is as smart as mine, and you both work very fast." Augustus chuckled, handed the file to Ron, and said, "Yes, there is also a reward for the congressman's murder case, a full $500,000. $500,000? Upon hearing this news, Mona's eyes turned into flashlights. But upon hearing such a large reward, Ron calmed down, put the folder back on Augustus' desk, and said to Augustus with a smile, "This money is too much." Hearing Ron's words, and seeing the calm smile on Ron's face, Augustus' smile grew bigger and bigger, and finally slammed the table hard. "Fouquet, I like you more and more now, Ron. I believe in the commander. The commander will never treat me unfairly." Ron gave Augustus a small compliment. Seeing Mona still in a daze, Augustus picked up the file and slowly explained, "The murder of the state legislator is not the case we are responsible for. Although we caught the murderer, the investigation team responsible for that case also made a lot of efforts, especially the original team leader, who is now the director of the Washington headquarters." Luo An nodded. Mona was silent, but after seeing Luo An nod, she hesitated and nodded. Seeing that both of them understood what he meant, Augustus was very satisfied and continued, "But after all, we caught the murderer, so it was still hard work." Team leader Veronis thought again and again, and decided to allocate a special fund to our number 5 investigation team starting from next month for 3 months. Seeing that Mona looked a little nervous and Luo An was still calm, Augustus admired Luo An more and smiled. "You 2 are the main agents who caught the murderer Conrad. The bonus will be issued at the end of this month, $30,000 each. The difference between 500,000 and 30,000 is a bit big," and Mona's face fell. Luo An nodded calmly and said with a smile, "Thank you, sir." I knew you wouldn't treat me badly. Okay, you can leave, now that we're done. Augustus waved his hand, signaling the two to leave the office, and then said seriously before Luo An left the office, handle the case well, Luo An. Verines admires you very much. Your future is better than mine. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Luo An's smile got even brighter. To get involved, you need power and background. What if you don't have any? Of course you have to suck up to someone. The two sat back at their workstations. Mona pondered for a long time and suddenly clapped her hands, startling Lassie who was sleeping next to her. What's wrong? Lassie opened her eyes in confusion. Mona hurriedly tidied up Lassie's uniform and whispered to comfort her, "It's okay, it's okay, it's just a bug. Go to sleep first." Okay. Lassie nodded, turned her face to one side, and closed her eyes again. Mona took a deep breath, suppressed the restlessness in her heart, slowly moved to Luo An's side, and whispered, "Luo An, let's go out for dinner tonight. I'll treat you." Seeing Luo An looking at her in surprise, and then his eyes gradually becoming weird, Mona immediately crossed her hands in front of her chest and said seriously, "No, I just want to treat you to dinner to express my gratitude. I haven't been feeling well these days, so it's not appropriate." Feeling unwell? Luo An nodded, then shook his head decisively. "Then I won't go." Mona. Please collect. Please collect. Please collect. Chapter 14. A place of great talents. On the first day of joining the number 5 investigation team, Luo An did nothing but sit at his workstation and browse the computer all day and then leave work on time. At 9 o'clock the next morning, Luo An, who had nothing to do, shook his head and tilted his head to see Mona chatting online. Reed was not in the office and he didn't know where he went. Only Lassie had just woken up and was eating. So Luo An moved his chair to Lassie and asked, "Lassie, are we like this for the whole week?" "What do you mean?" Lassie had just woken up and was still confused. After hearing Luo An's question, she took a while to react and understood what he meant, so she tilted her head and replied, "Are you saying there is no work this week?" "Of course not." Then Lassie changed the subject and muttered while eating, "We haven't had any work for the past 2 months." "What?" Luo An was confused by Lassie's heavy breathing and then hurriedly asked, "Why?" "Because our number 5 investigation team has just been established and no one has transferred the case to us." Lassie finished a small bag of donuts and started eating the second bag. "That's not right. 3 months ago, the New York Police Department did hand over several cases to our investigation team 5, but we didn't solve the cases within the specified time, so the team leader Verineth withdrew the cases and handed them over to other investigation teams." Luo An fell silent, then looked up and asked, "Did the other investigation teams solve those cases?" Lassie nodded as a matter of course and said, "Yes, they did." Luo An. "Where the hell did I come to?" Seeing that Luo An's expression was a little distorted, Lassie patted his shoulder comfortingly and asked, "Why do you think Augustus transferred you to investigation team 5? Luo An already had the answer in his mind. "Besides because you are handsome, it is also because you can solve cases." Luo An. "I knew it." Lassie finished the second bag of donuts and started to unpack the third bag. At the same time, she introduced the identities of the members of the number 5 investigation team to Luo An. Ryder is from the SWAT team. He is top notch in shooting, fighting, search and rescue, and weapons, but he can't solve cases. Luo An. "I, Lassie, came from the intelligence department. I'm good at gathering information and undercover tracking, but I can't solve cases." Luo An. "The technicians sitting behind you are all veterans who have worked in the FBI's archives for several years. It's definitely faster for them to find relevant information about suspects than any other investigation team." Luo An's expression became more and more strange, "but they can't solve cases either." "Yeah." Lassie patted Luo An on the shoulder, her face serious, "So we need someone who can lead us to solve the case." Luo An almost suffocated and took a deep breath to recover. "On the bright side, at least this team needs me, and I'm an indispensable member of this team." But on second thought, Luo An asked Lassie again, "What about the team leader Augustus? Do you know what he did before?" "Of course I know." Lassie nodded and introduced. August was an administrative staff member of the Criminal Justice Department. Luo An nodded and understood. So Augustus can't solve the case either. Yes. After learning all this news, Luo An touched his chin and asked, then if nothing unexpected happens, if there is a case handed over to our investigation team in the future, I will lead you to solve the case, right? Lassie pondered for 2 seconds and nodded. It should be. Luo An then asked, since I'm leading you to solve the case, what's the use of Augustus as the team leader? Waiting for the case to be solved and then taking the credit? Of course not. Hearing Luo An's words, Lassie immediately widened her eyes and said to him seriously, August is responsible for taking the blame and dealing with his superiors to resist the thunder. Point Lassie, why were you transferred here? Because I insulted my superior. You are worthy of it. Back at his workstation, Luo An looked around and saw Mona typing away on the computer as if hacking into some program. He couldn't help but sigh. The 5th investigation team is really a place of talent and talent. Just as Luo An was thinking about whether he should temporarily leave the 5th investigation team for a few days and go out to do some private work to make money, the team leader Augustus walked to the front of the office area with a big belly and said loudly, everyone, pay attention. This time, 2 cases have been handed over to our 5th investigation team. One is a missing kidnapping case, and the other is a serial murder case. In 2005, the United States had not yet popularized the large screens of later generations, so there were always several large whiteboards standing in the front of the office area. Augustus pulled out a whiteboard and began to write the tentative names of the 2 cases on it. The missing kidnapping of a wealthy woman, the serial murder case of a female corpse in the lake. Riyadh, who returned to the office area, distributed the information to everyone, and Luo An's information was the most detailed. Luo An. Now that there is a case, he has to look at it. According to the urgency of the case, Luo An began to check the first missing and kidnapping case. The bear-like Riyadh also began to introduce everyone. The victim's name is Sabina Card. She is 36 years old and disappeared in a villa in Connecticut. The incident happened between last night, when she returned home, and 8 o'clock this morning. This morning, her husband Darren came back from a business trip and found that someone had broken into his home. His wife was also missing, but her mobile phone and wallet were still left at the door. Seeing that everyone had finished reading the information in their hands, Augustus knocked on the whiteboard to attract everyone's attention, his face serious. Until there is further evidence, we have to assume that she is still alive. The police at the Greenwich Police Department believe this is a kidnapping, but this kind of thing is not very common over there, so they chose to seek our help. Greenwich Village, located on the Long Island Sound, is a satellite town of New York City and one of the most upscale areas near New York State. It has a very high standard of living and many celebrities, artists, and musicians were born here. Without waiting for everyone to ask their questions, Augustus took out a few crime scene photos from a folder and posted them on another whiteboard, saying, serial murder refers to the illegal killing of 2 or more victims in different incidents by one criminal or multiple criminals. At 5 o'clock this morning, a wild angler accidentally found a female corpse in a lake on the border of New York and New Jersey. Divers found 3 more female corpses after checking the bottom of the lake. The first victim, Linda Chipo, was married and 28 years old. She was reported missing by her husband 8 months ago. A forensic examination proved that she was killed shortly after her disappearance. The second victim, Beatrice Leon, was married and 34 years old. She disappeared 2 months ago. The third victim, Natalie Khalil, was married and 25 years old. She disappeared a month ago. The fourth victim, Tamara Terry, was married and 30 years old. She disappeared 2 weeks ago. Please vote for the monthly ticket. Please vote for the monthly ticket. Please vote for the monthly ticket. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15 New Case. After introducing the general situation of the two cases, Augustus patted the whiteboard beside him with a serious face. The serial murder case spans too long and is difficult to solve, so we put it behind. The kidnapping of the wealthy woman happened this morning. The 24 hours of her disappearance is the golden time to rescue the kidnapped person. We must find her and rescue her today. According to the general process, the next step is for the team leader to assign investigation tasks to everyone, and then Augustus looked at Luo An and asked in a deep voice, "Luo An, what do you think?" He was a little speechless, but thinking of the wealthy kidnapped people who were rescued, they would generally give a large amount of thank you funds to the agents who rescued them. Luo An did not hesitate, pointing to the identity information in the folder and said, "The kidnapped Sabanakard is a young wealthy woman. After her parents died, she inherited assets worth $30 million. This money is enough to make people have bad intentions. If something happens to one spouse, the other will definitely not be able to escape the consequences. So I suggest that we go to the crime scene immediately. We should not only monitor the scene for traces, but also carefully interrogate her husband Darren." Okay. Augustus nodded. He was very satisfied with Roan's analysis, so he assigned tasks to everyone and said, "Roan, Lassie, the two of you go to the crime scene now. Mona, you are responsible for checking the work status of Sabanakard's husband Darren on the computer. Everyone else, stay in the office and wait for Roan's data inspection at any time." Having said that, Augustus glanced at Riyad, who was waiting for orders, and after a moment of silence, he whispered, "Ryder, you go and contact the New Jersey police in the serial murder case. Ask for more information and pretend to be solving the case." "Okay, sir." "Roan, what does pretend mean?" Everyone started to get busy. Just as Luo An was about to go to the crime scene with Lassie, Augustus suddenly called him to his office. After the two sat down, Augustus said, "Luo An, this kidnapping case is very important to you." Luo An nodded. The rich woman was very rich. He would definitely get a lot of thank you money if he rescued her. It was really important. Augustus continued, "You are the first trainee agent to become a full-time agent. Many people are jealous of you, but they can't say it because you caught the murderer of a shooting case with just Mona." Luo An looked up and understood what Augustus meant. Team leader number 1, Bruce, has gone to the Washington headquarters to attend a training session. He has been the leader of the investigation team for so many years. He is likely to be promoted when he comes back this time. Although he will not be my direct superior, the superiors of other departments are also superiors. Augustus took a sip of coffee and continued, "The fisher you beat up the day before yesterday is Bruce's nephew. He is very upset with you now." Hearing this, Luo An immediately asked his fighter to protect him. "Sir, you have to help me." "Of course." Augustus nodded and smiled. "Don't worry, Bruce will definitely not attack you directly. Verines is still here." Luo An understood what Augustus meant. Soldiers against soldiers and generals against generals, directly attacking other people's subordinates. This is not a slap on the butt of the subordinates, this is a slap on the face of the superiors. Just a nephew, it is not worth paying such a high price. Thinking of this, Roan obviously relaxed, and Augustus continued, "So you must do your best in this kidnapping case. If you can solve the case, that's the best. If you can't solve the case, don't do anything that doesn't comply with the procedures during the investigation, and don't leave room for certain people to talk about it." Roan nodded, indicating that he understood. "Very good." Augustus liked smart people like Roan very much, and before Roan left the office, he gave a final reminder, "If you are sure that you can't catch the real murderer during the investigation, contact me immediately, and I will transfer Riyad to take over your case. Understand?" "Okay, thank you, sir." Roan suddenly realized that it was no wonder that Riyad, a rough guy, was asked to handle the serial murder case. It turned out to be a backup plan. Thinking of this, Roan saw that Augustus' eyes had changed a little. As expected of an administrative manager of the Criminal Justice Department, he really had a lot of tricks and methods. He picked up his Nokia in the office and called Mona. After confirming that there was no problem with the remote contact method, Roan and Lassie nodded and went to the equipment warehouse together. Like Mona, Lassie, who had taken a bulletproof vest and a Glock 19, looked at Roan in bewilderment. Combat uniform, tactical helmet, plate carrying vest, 3 smoke bombs, 10 stun grenades, 2 Glock 18 submachine guns, 5 pistols with extended magazines. Roan. Lassie's mouth twitched, and she said in disbelief, "We are just going to investigate a kidnapping case, not to go to the battlefield." Roan nodded. "Of course not to the battlefield. If I were to go to the battlefield, would I only take a pistol instead of a rifle? Okay, let's go." After finishing the equipment, Roan shook his legs and strode out of the equipment warehouse. New York is not a safe city. I have always lacked a sense of security. Lassie. In a villa in Greenwich district. Seeing Roan fully armed, the Greenwich police in charge of protecting the scene in the villa were a little stunned, but under Lassie's urging, they quickly came to their senses and led the two into the crime scene. The kitchen door was pried open, and the door frame is badly damaged. A middle-aged bald white policeman walked into the kitchen, pointed at the ground, and introduced to Roan and Lassie. "There is a pool of blood at the door, but there is not much blood, and it doesn't look like it would cause death." Roan bent down and squatted on the kitchen floor, looked at the pool of blood that was 2 palms wide on the ground, turned his head to look at the dining table next to him, and found an inconspicuous friction mark at the foot of the table. He stood up and said to Lassie and the police, "The victim should have been attacked on the head from behind and fainted on the spot. While the murderer was moving the victim's shoes accidentally scraped the dining table. Police. You can see so many things at a glance." Lassie looked down at the foot of the dining table and didn't say anything. Seeing this, Luo An tilted his head and asked the policeman, "The owner of this house is so rich, didn't they install surveillance or security systems?" The bald policeman shrugged, with a hint of envy in his tone. "They just bought this house in Greenwich this week. They plan to spend their wedding anniversary and honeymoon here, so they haven't had time to install those things yet." According to the couple's friends, they have a very good relationship. Although they have no children, they spend their wedding anniversary and honeymoon somewhere in the world every year. Hearing this, Luo An was silent for a moment and asked in a low voice, "Mr. Policeman, excuse me, how much does this villa cost?" The bald policeman glanced at Luo An and saw the same envious look in the other's eyes as himself. He shrugged and whispered, "The villa next door is listed at $8 million US. Fouquet." Luo An cursed inwardly, and his price assessment of the kidnapped person increased by 2 points. "I must get more thank you money later." Hearing the gate of the villa being opened and a car driving in, Roan and Lassie walked over to question the missing person's husband Darren. Both parties sat down in the villa's study. "Please briefly describe what happened today, Mr. Darren." Lassie took out a small notebook to record, while Roan sat aside and carefully observed Darren's performance when he spoke. Darren is a middle-aged white man who is neatly dressed and looks honest but high-spirited. Hearing what Lassie said, he immediately said, "I came back around 6 this morning. As soon as I entered the door, I saw Sabina's shoes and handbag in the entrance. She never puts her handbag at the door. I felt something was wrong at the time. When I walked into the restaurant and saw the blood, I immediately called the police." "Okay." Lassie simply wrote something in her notebook, then looked up and continued to ask, "The police said you were not at home last night, but on a business trip. Where were you on a business trip, and which hotel did you stay in?" "What do you mean?" Hearing what Lassie said, Darren's face instantly darkened. "Do you think I did it? Please collect. Please collect. Please collect." Chapter 16 Prenuptial Agreement. "This is a normal inquiry, okay?" Without waiting for Lassie to speak, Roan took out a Glock 18 and placed it on the desk, smiling. "We don't suspect you, Mr. Darren. But according to the procedure, we must ask these questions to eliminate our suspicion of you." Seeing Roan's gun, Darren frowned and was about to get angry, but seeing the smile on Roan's face, he barely suppressed it and said in an unhappy tone, "I checked a real estate in Los Angeles yesterday and stayed at the Hilton Hotel at night." "Okay." Lassie wrote and drew on her notes, asked a few simple questions, and then asked seriously, "Mr. Darren, have you and your wife offended anyone recently? When you bought this villa, did you find any strange people?" "No." Darren waved his hands repeatedly. His tone was very angry. There was nothing wrong. When I bought this villa, and my husband and I have always treated people gently. The company's affairs are handled according to the regulations. We have never offended anyone. Okay. Lassie simply wrote these things down and turned to look at Roan. Seeing this, Roan immediately said, Mr. Darren, in view of your and your couple's financial situation, we judge that the other party kidnapped Miss Sabina for ransom, so if nothing unexpected happens, the other party will call you soon to ask for the ransom. Okay. Hearing Luo An's words, Darren breathed a sigh of relief, waved his hand and said directly, it doesn't matter, as long as Sabina can come back, no matter how much money the other party wants, I don't care. Luo An ignored the other party's low-key pretense and continued, but for Sabina's personal safety, we will send an agent to follow you, protect your safety, and monitor your mobile phone, so as to try to locate the kidnapper through the phone. No, you can't do this. Hearing this, Darren stood up abruptly and said in a very unhappy tone, since the other party just wants money, just give them the money directly. What if the other party finds out about your existence and kills you directly? I can't bet with Sabina's life. When Lassie heard this, she subconsciously wanted to refute the other party, but Luo An grabbed her arm and turned to look at Luo An. Luo An stood up and asked seriously, Mr. Darren, are you sure you don't need us to protect your personal safety? No. Darren answered coldly, but for some reason his tone suddenly softened and he continued, I just want my wife to come back safely. If the other party wants money, then give it to them. We are not short of money. It's just a simple deal. I can do it myself. You FBI just need to catch the kidnappers. Okay. Luo An nodded, without saying anything else, and pulled Lassie, who had not yet reacted, out of the study in the villa. The two walked out of the villa. Lassie looked around to make sure no one could hear her talking. She immediately asked in confusion, Roan, the other party is very uncooperative, and is very suspicious. Yes, it might be him who did it. Roan nodded, turned on his Nokia, and asked Mona on the other end of the phone, Mona, have you checked Darren's recent financial situation or consumption bills? Of course, you have to believe in my strength, Mona. Mona's crisp voice came from the other end of the phone, and she laughed. Darren did have a plane ticket to Los Angeles yesterday, and it was a first-class cabin, but several local Hilton hotels did not have his check-in record. So I checked Darren's previous bills again, and found that he often went to Las Vegas in the past year, and basically he had outgoing bills, but no incoming bills. A simple estimate shows that he has probably lost nearly $2 million. Roan nodded and continued to ask, did Darren and Sabina sign any prenuptial agreement when they got married? Wait a few minutes. There was a crackling keyboard sound from the other end of the phone. After a long time, Mona's voice came over, and she said excitedly, there is one. It is recorded in a well-known law firm in New York. It contains several pages of regulations. One of the regulations is that, if Darren initiates the divorce, he must leave the house with nothing. If Sabina dies, Darren can only get $300,000. The funds Sabina inherited from her parents will be donated. I don't understand the thinking of rich people. Luo An shook his head and tilted his head to Lassie and said, Darren's money mainly comes from his and Sabina's company. He is addicted to gambling and has spent a lot of money. It is very likely that the capital chain in his hands has been broken, and he can't tell Sabina about this. So in order to get a large sum of money, kidnapping his wife for a ransom is obviously a good idea. According to the prenuptial agreement, Darren can only get $300,000 if Sabina dies. This amount of money will prevent Darren from killing his wife for money, because it is not worth it. Lassie also came to her senses, and continued to analyze what Luo An said, so Sabina should be safe now, because Darren will not get the money if she dies. Darren is just looking for money. That's right. Luo An nodded. This direction can be tried, so he raised his Nokia, and looked at the car in front of him and asked, Mona, the cars in this villa are all the latest Cadillacs. The license plate numbers are asterisk 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 asterisk. Can you locate them? Of course. A few keyboard sounds rang out, and Mona quickly smiled and said, done. I know where they are now. Okay, hard work, Mona. After hanging up the phone, Luo An turned to look at Lassie and smiled. You said before that you came from the intelligence department and have high tracking skills. Darren will be handed over to you next. Wherever he goes, you go. Easy. Lassie smiled, threw a trust me gesture to Luo An, turned around and walked into the villa. Two-pronged approach to ensure that Darren's next move will never be out of his control. Luo An nodded with satisfaction, just about to return to the car and wait for Darren's next move. The Nokia suddenly rang. Taking out the phone, he found that it was Ryder who called him. Luo An was a little puzzled, but still answered the phone. Luo An, I need your help. Riad on the other end of the phone said without any nonsense. I have read all the files on the serial murder case and found no clues. I just heard in the office that you have solved the kidnapping case. In this case, how about you analyze the files on the serial murder case? Luo An picked up his Nokia and took a look, hesitantly said, I haven't solved the kidnapping case, and the murderer of the kidnapping case has not been caught yet. I can't go back to the office now. You don't have to come back. Riad's voice on the other end of the phone changed, and self-identical to the one Luo An was sitting in slowly stopped on the road not far away. Riad got out of the car with his mobile phone and grinned. I've come to you with the files. Luo An. Please recommend. Please recommend. Please recommend. Chapter 17. It's okay. I have a stun bomb. On a road outside Greenwich. Sitting in Ryder's SUV, Roan looked at the documents in his hand with a frown. According to the on-site report of the emergency response team, when the bodies were found, the 3 female victims were all dead at the bottom of the lake with heavy objects tied to their legs. There were no items related to the identity information of the victims at the scene, and the identities of the 4 victims were finally confirmed by checking the local missing persons file. In addition, the autopsy report showed that the 4 victims were strangled to death with ropes, with marks of binding on their wrists and ankles, bruises on the upper body, and lacerations on the lower body. It is suspected that the 4 victims were tortured by the murderer for a long time. But because the bodies were soaked in the lake water for too long, the forensic doctor could not find the murderer's white genetic material, skin fragments, hair, etc., and could not test the murderer's DNA. It's a headache. After reading the information, Roan closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. The United States has a vast territory and a population of talented people. It not only produces various cult organizations, but also serial killers, bank robbers, flower dealers, extremists, and a large number of other high-end talents who can compete with the police in wits and courage. Thank you for your hard work, Roan. Seeing Roan sitting in the car with a frown on his face, Riad hurriedly took out a few bags of still hot hamburgers and fried chicken nuggets from the trunk, handed them to Roan, and said with a flattering smile, if you can't figure it out, eat something first. No. Roan's mouth twitched, and he rejected the suggestion. That would increase the possibility of him becoming bald. After packing up the information, he said to Riad, the hunting time for the murderer of this serial murder case is getting shorter and shorter. If we want to find the real murderer, we must find the connection between the 4 female victims. I can't leave here. You go back to the office immediately and find a technical agent to visit the families of the 4 victims and ask when the victims last contacted them before they disappeared. At the same time, find out the criminal records of the victims' parents, relatives, friends, husbands, etc. What? Hearing about these complicated tasks, Riad was overwhelmed and subconsciously grabbed a burger and stuffed it into Roan's hand. Can you give me another job? Or how about letting someone else do this kind of work? How about Mona? Roan shook his head decisively and refused. No, Mona still has to help me investigate this missing case. Okay. Seeing that Roan refused to give in, Riad thought of how Augustus, the head of the investigation team, had repeatedly emphasized that he had to listen to Roan's arrangements before he came. He immediately walked back to the car with a sad face, ready to go back to the headquarters to recruit people for investigation. Back in his SUV, Roan watched Riad driving away. He didn't expect that Riad, a bear-like man, was actually a little cute. Just as he was thinking about the clues of the serial murder case, Roan's Nokia suddenly rang. He picked up the phone and found that it was Lassie on the other end. Roan, Darren has started to act. Huh. Roan was shocked and asked hurriedly, which car is he driving? What's the license plate number? He didn't drive the Cadillac in the garage, but the latest BMW ***, with a license plate number of *****. Lassie on the other end of the phone said in a very relaxed tone, "Don't worry, I'm following him. His anti-tracking technology is the same as that of a kindergarten child. I won't lose him, even if I close my eyes." Roan was silent for 2 seconds and asked in confusion, "My car is outside Greenwich. Where did you get the car to track Darren?" I borrowed it from Darren's neighbor's garage." "You didn't tell the neighbor, right?" "Of course." Roan hung up the phone. He finally understood, while Lassie said that Augustus was used to take the blame. "It feels so bad to have someone above me." Roan smiled and called Mona to tell her the license plate number of Darren's BMW, so that Mona could locate him, and then he rushed out with a foot on the accelerator. 10 minutes later, the SUV driven by Roan stopped in a parking lot on a coastline in eastern New York. Behind the SUV was the Jaguar that Lassie had borrowed from her neighbor in the villa, and behind the Jaguar was Darren's new BMW. Listening to the sound of the waves and the sea not far away, and looking at the almost empty parking lot, Roan said to Lassie on the other end of the phone, "This place is very suitable for paying the ransom, and it is also very suitable for driving away directly if you find something wrong." Lassie looked at Darren, who was anxious in the BMW through the rearview mirror, and asked into the phone, "What should we do if the other party runs away?" "It's okay, I have a stun grenade." Roan took out a stun grenade from his waist and threw it up and down in his hand, laughing. "I have always been good at throwing things." Thinking of the scene where the windows of a lot of cars in the parking lot were shattered on the ground after the stun grenade exploded, Lassie shuddered. Unexpectedly, Roan was more ruthless than herself. If all the windows in the parking lot were shattered, how much would Augustus have to pay? Ding ding. Just when Lassie was about to persuade Luo An to try not to use stun grenades, an ordinary Buick sedan drove in and slowly stopped next to the BMW where Darren was. Then, Darren got out of the BMW, opened the passenger seat of the Buick, and sat on it. Action. Luo An shouted. Lassie drove the Jaguar in reverse gear and instantly blocked the BMW and Buick, while Luo An drove the SUV to quickly block the back of the two cars. The two got out of the car and hid behind the car, took out a pistol, and pointed it at the Buick. Luo An shouted, "FBI. The people in the car get out. Otherwise I will shoot." After 2 seconds of silence, Darren, who was in the passenger seat, raised his hands and slowly got out of the car. The door of the driver's seat slowly opened, and a white young man who looked very thin raised his hands and got out of the car. Luo An and Lassie approached slowly with pistols in hand. After taking out handcuffs and handcuffing the two, they did not find the imagined ransom in the two cars. Investigation Team Number 5, in the interrogation room. The FBI is different from the police stations outside. Whether it is the Department of Homeland Security, the Intelligence Division, the Crime Network Response and Services Division, or even the Science and Technology Division, the Information and Technology Processing Division, they all have their own interrogation rooms. The Criminal Investigation Division under the Crime Network Response and Services Division is no exception. There are 13 investigation teams under the Criminal Investigation Division, and each investigation team is equipped with 2 interrogation rooms. The interrogation rooms here are not like the interrogation rooms in the police stations outside. There are law enforcement recorders that cannot be turned off throughout the process. Prisoners can be handcuffed without saying a word, and they can even ask lawyers to speak for them. The FBI interrogation room also has law enforcement recorders, but the law enforcement recorders here are seriously aged and damaged, and they often shut down automatically. Many times, when the prisoners do not answer the agent's questions, the recorders start to malfunction. After being caught, some prisoners said that their lawyers were not there and could not answer questions. Then these prisoners would be found on the spot for various serious illegal and criminal acts such as tax evasion and shooting federal agents, and they would be deprived of the right to see a lawyer on the spot. Some prisoners even dreamed that they were beaten. When the lawyer of such a criminal arrives, there will be no medical examination. After all, the technology has been developed and matured. Want to see the interrogation record? Sorry, the equipment is broken and it is not recorded. Someone asked if there is no one who can control this group of FBI. Of course there is, but will the person who can control the FBI be invited to the FBI interrogation room? Will the criminals who can hire super lawyers that the FBI does not want to meet be caught by the FBI? The most important point is that the time is now 2005 and those messy organizations in later generations have not yet appeared. Please collect it. Chapter 18 Boyfriend. In the interrogation room with two lights hanging on it, Darren, who was full of vigor and vitality, had disappeared, and his face was now full of anxiety. Good afternoon, Mr. Darren. Roan and Lassie pushed open the door of the interrogation room and walked in. They sat opposite the handcuffed Darren. Before the two of them could speak, Darren hurriedly said, "Two agents." "No, there is also one agent. Believe me, Sabina's disappearance really has nothing to do with me. I really don't know anything." Roan raised his eyebrows and continued to ask with an unchanged expression, "Then what about this thing, Mr. Cunningham? Your wife is missing, and you didn't let us protect you. You told us that you only wanted to pay the ransom, but turned around to see this Mr. Cunningham. Did he kidnap your wife?" "No, no, no. He couldn't have done that." Darren shook his head repeatedly when he heard this, and Roan continued to ask, "You said before that you were on a business trip in Los Angeles at the time of the incident, and you stayed at the Hilton Hotel at night, but we didn't find your check-in record at the Hilton Hotel. Where did you go at that time? Did you go back to New York to kidnap your own wife?" Darren's face became more and more ugly. Seeing that Luo An and the other two were just staring at him quietly, after a long silence, Darren finally sighed and whispered, "I was not in Los Angeles last night, but went to Las Vegas. Cunningham worked in the casino. After he got off work, I went to his house and played with him in a room all night. It was the kind of play you think." Luo An: "I didn't think about it. I don't know. I don't understand. Don't talk nonsense." After a moment of silence, Luo An coughed lightly and asked seriously, "Darren, do you know what it means to deceive us?" "I know. It's a federal felony." Hearing Darren's words, Luo An nodded without changing his expression. "But he just learned about this from Lassie. Lying to FBI agents is actually a felony. I don't know who made the law." Luo An was secretly happy in his heart, and he would have fun in the future. Seeing Luo An's serious expression, Darren became more and more panicked and hurriedly explained, "But I had no choice. After all, what happened between Cunningham and I is not glorious. It's not the relationship between you and Cunningham that is shameful." Hearing Darren's words, Lassie, a lesbian next to him, was unhappy. She slammed the table and said, "What's shameful is that you already have a wife, Sabina. What you did is called cheating and betrayal. Do you understand? I love Sabina." Hearing Lassie say that she had cheated and betrayed, Darren was also unhappy. He also slammed the table and yelled at Lassie, "Whether you believe it or not, I love Sabina. I love her very much. I even thought that I was the one who was kidnapped." Luo An felt that the topic was a bit off and hurriedly pulled Lassie to bring the topic back. "Then why did you look for Cunningham today? Do you suspect that he kidnapped your wife?" "No, I just want to make it clear with him." Darren covered his head and said helplessly, "Quinniel has her own boyfriend, and we are just playing around. The reason I went to find Cunningham today was to make things clear and cut off contact with him. I think Sabina's kidnapping is God's punishment for me. After all, she loves me so much, and I love her so much. We celebrate our wedding anniversary and honeymoon every year." Luo An: "The sense of deja vu is too strong. But on second thought, this situation is nothing in America. There are even more outrageous open marriages." Tilting his head to glance at Lassie, he didn't quite understand what this kind of same-sex relationship was all about. After being glared at by Lassie, Roan hurriedly turned to Darren and asked, "Okay, Mr. Darren, do you have anything else to say? If we find that you are still hiding after we leave this interrogation room, then..." "No, Mr. Agent." Darren wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes and pleaded to Roan with a serious face, "I don't know if you believe me or not, but I really love Sabina. I really love my wife. Please find her. I can give you a reward of 1 million later." Roan's eyes lit up instantly. He stood up and grabbed Darren's hands and assured with a righteous face, "Don't worry, Mr. Darren, I believe in your love, and I will do my best to find your wife, Lassie." A few minutes later, in another interrogation room, Kunal, who was thin and weak, about 1.7 meters tall, but had deep facial features, heard Roan's question and said with disdain, "Stop it, agent, I don't even know who Darren's wife is, let alone kidnap her." "Why not kidnap her?" Roan said with a serious face. "Darren's wife Sabina is a wealthy woman. We have checked your financial conditions and they are very average. As long as you kidnap Sabina and get the ransom, you will have no worries about food and clothing for the rest of your life. Come on, although I don't have much savings, there are many men willing to spend money on me." Kunal waved his hands, crossed his legs, and smiled. "I'm very famous in Las Vegas. Many men looking for excitement will contact me, and my skills are very good. Just one time will make them never forget it. I know more than a dozen rich men like Darren. Do you think I will be short of money?" Roan was silent, opening his mouth, but not knowing what to say. It was Lassie on the side who continued to ask, "Darren said you have a boyfriend. Will he be jealous of Darren because of you and kidnap Darren's wife?" "My boyfriend?" Kunal was stunned, and then he almost died of laughter. He explained while laughing, "Darren may have misunderstood. My boyfriend in his mouth is actually just my last client. I just said that, as long as it's once, I will make men remember me forever." Luo An. After leaving the interrogation room, Luo An sat on a chair in the conference room with his eyes closed. The customs and practices of America had a great impact on him, and he needed to relax first. "I checked it." Mona walked to Luo An and Lassie with the laptop and said with a smile, "The surveillance at the door of Kunal's house showed that Darren and Kunal did not come out all night. As for Kunal's boyfriend in Darren's mouth, he was a small actor. He was filming at sea when the crime happened. Everyone at the scene could testify for him that he had no time to commit the crime." "Okay." Luo An scratched her head. The clues on her husband Darren's side were temporarily cut off, so she could only focus on the missing person himself. Could it be that Sabina's company's competitor did it? Lassie pulled Mona to her side, put her arm around her shoulders, and tilted her head to ask Roan, "Should we check the business situation of Sabina's company to see if their company's recent business has offended certain people?" "Mona, just talk. Why are you hugging me? It's not impossible." Roan nodded, turned to Mona and said, "You go and investigate the companies under Sabina and Darren, and take a quick look at their business situation." Lassie raised her hand. "What about us? Let's go and check Sabina's villa. Maybe there are some things in that villa that we haven't found yet." Roan stood up from his chair and stretched his body. "The good news is that our efforts were not in vain. For now, Darren's suspicion has been ruled out. Please recommend." Chapter 19 Medical Center. In the Greenwich Villa, Roan and Darren sat in the study, while Lassie and another female agent went to the couple's room to conduct a simple search. "Mr. Darren." Luo An took a sip of coffee, pointed to the clock beside the conference table, and said, "Your wife disappeared around 6 in the morning. It's 2 in the afternoon now, and 8 hours have passed, but the kidnappers haven't called to ask for a ransom. Are you sure you and your wife haven't offended anyone in business?" "Definitely not. I really don't know, Mr. Agent." Darren sat on the sofa with a very ugly look on his face. It was not known whether it was because his wife was missing or because he was worried that he would not get much money if his wife died. After hearing Luo An's question, he immediately explained, "Sabina handles most of the company's affairs. I'm generally responsible for contacting those partners and maintaining relationships." "Okay." Luo An nodded. "This is also an alternative kind of woman in charge of the home and man in charge of the outside." Just as he was about to continue asking, Darren seemed to suddenly think of something, slapped his thigh and said, "By the way, Mr. Agent, Sabina often goes to a women's medical care center to maintain her body. When we last called last night, Sabina said that she went to the medical center once during the day. I don't know." Before Darren could finish his words, Lassie walked into the study with a pink membership card, handed it to Roan and said, "I found the VIP card of the medical center." "Okay." Roan took the card and nodded, and warned Darren not to leave the villa for the time being. There were 2 agents outside the villa responsible for monitoring and protecting him, and then took Lassie back to the south. The dark car was speeding on the road. Lassie took the pink membership card and looked at it carefully. Roan was a little confused when he saw this. "What's wrong, Lassie? Is there something wrong with the membership card?" "There's nothing wrong with the membership card, but the address on the membership card is wrong." Lassie rubbed the membership card with her fingernails, with a half smile on her face. She turned to Roan and said, "The address on this membership card is the Lower East Side of New York. I'm very familiar with that area. I remember there seems to be no medical center there." Huh. Roan understood instantly. "Are you saying Sabina lied to Darren?" "Who knows?" Lassie took out her pistol and began to organize the magazine. She threw the membership card aside and said calmly, "This couple is not as simple as imagined." Roan drove the SUV to the opposite side of the street, where the membership card was recorded. He turned around and found that there was a high-end cafe across the street. Turning to look at Lassie, Lassie smiled slightly, holding the membership card between 2 fingers, and her tone suddenly became full of teasing. "Come on, little boy, I'll take you to see the world today." Lassie is 32 years old this year, and Luo An is only 25 years old. To some extent, he is indeed a little boy. The 2 got off the car, and Luo An followed Lassie across the road into the cafe. The cafe is not big. It is now past 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Luo An looked around and saw only a few men and women drinking afternoon tea. However, before he could ask any questions, Lassie took Luo An's arm and half pulled him into the back kitchen of the cafe. "Don't talk, leave it to me." Lassie pulled Luo An down and whispered in his ear. The 2 continued to walk forward, and then on the way to the back kitchen, a sturdy black man sitting in front of a thick curtain suddenly appeared. Seeing Luo An and Lassie, the sturdy black man stood up and wanted to ask something, but when he saw the pink membership card between Lassie's hands, he nodded and sat back down. Lifting the thick curtain, there was a staircase going down. The 2 walked to the end of the stairs and found a door with shining lights. Pushing the door open, the music full of teasing and temptation broke into their ears. Luo An looked around. Under the shining colored lights, couples of men and women sat on the sofa in the hall to discuss how to use toys. When they were happy, they walked to the rooms on both sides of the hall and began to sweat while using the toys they just discussed on each other. "Welcome to the new world." Lassie looked up and smiled in Luo An's ear, took his arm, and walked to the bar in the corner, knocked on the table and shouted, "Where is your boss?" The waitress at the bar poured 2 glasses of wine for the 2, pointed to a pink room in the corner of the hall and said, "The boss is playing and has no time." Nodding, Lassie took Luo An's arm and walked to the pink room without knocking on the door and broke in directly. "Hey, Fouquet, what's wrong with you?" The moment the door was opened, several angry curses rang out in the room. Lassie didn't care. She pulled out a black whip from behind the door and whipped it. She took out the FBI's golden badge and showed it to everyone, shouting, "Boss, stay. Everyone else get out." Luo An, "Is it so wild?" Exclamation mark. Seeing the FBI's golden badge, several men and women in the pink room stopped their body movements and turned to look at a naked, heavily made up middle-aged white woman. Seeing her wave her hand, several men and women hurriedly put on their clothes and ran out of the room. One of the white men was so anxious that he ran off the bed without even taking out his things. It was too damn eye-catching. Luo An sighed, not knowing whether his luck was too bad or the customs of America were too rampant. Why did he always encounter these weird things today? FBI? A middle-aged white woman, Avila, sat up from the bed, picked up a cigarette, lit it and put it in her mouth. She didn't put on any clothes, just looked at Lassie and Roan quietly, and smiled. "Why did you come to my place today? How can I help you?" Lassie didn't waste any words. She took the photo of Sabina from Roan, showed it to Avila, and said, "She is a member of yours. Find all the people who have served her before. I have something to ask them." "Impossible, Ms. Agent." Avila stood up from the bed and said as she put on her clothes, "This is a top secret space we have built to give our customers the illusion of safety. We can't show you our customers' privacy. This violates our principles." Hearing Avila's words, Lassie was not angry. She took out her mobile phone and said, "Then I'll contact the NYPD, New York Police Department, to see if they will deal with you here. We have a formal and legal business license, and everything here complies with regulations. The FBI wants to search here, but they should go to the court to apply for a search warrant first." Avila exhaled a puff of cigarette, touched Lass's face and smiled. "Why do you think I've been able to run this place safely until now? You." Lass's face froze, and Avila's smile widened. Just as he was about to continue talking, Roan, who was standing next to him, suddenly stretched out his hand to block the two of them. Seeing Avila looking at him, Roan took out his cell phone and said with a smile, "My boss used to work at the ICE, Federal Revenue Service. Do you want to talk to him?" Hearing this, Avila suddenly fell silent and then glared at Roan and Lassie fiercely and said as he walked towards the door, "Give me 10 minutes, I'll call those people out. Please collect. Please collect." Chapter 20 Grenade. "Well done, Roan." Seeing Avila walk out of the room and start ordering the bar waiter to find someone, Lassie threw the whip aside and patted Roan on the shoulder with great satisfaction. "I didn't expect you to be so good at lying. Are you praising me or scolding me?" Looking around the room, Lassie picked up an unopened egg-shaped toy and put it in her pocket. She also stuffed an unopened grenade-shaped toy into Roan's pocket and said with a smile, "Of course I'm praising you. You didn't lie to me." Ignoring Lassie's little action, Roan turned and left the pink room. Seeing this, the bar owner Avila waved to him to hurry over and then led the two into a room with a purple door. "These people are our service staff." Avila stuffed a dozen pink business cards into Roan's hand, scratched Roan's palm, and then pointed to the men and women who entered the room one by one and said, "They are all here." Roan looked at the business cards expressionlessly. Seeing that the number of men and women in the room had exceeded 15, he turned around and asked after a moment of silence, "Have all these people served Sabina?" "Who is Sabina?" Lassie patted Roan on the shoulder and whispered, "People who come out to play don't use their real names, they all use pseudonyms." After that, Lassie showed the photos in her mobile phone to everyone. When everyone saw the photos, they suddenly realized it turned out to be Callista, our queen of punishment. She is our favorite customer. Yes, every time I can't get out of bed after serving her. Hearing the comments of the men and women in the room about Sabina, Roan silently sighed that Mr. Darren was really a cactus. His head was so green that it bloomed. With a cough to attract everyone's attention, Roan asked in a serious tone, "From 8 o'clock last night to 6 o'clock this morning, has any one of you seen Callista?" Everyone looked at each other and no one answered. A white girl with wheat-colored skin, obvious waistline and abdominal muscles in the crowd laughed. "Mr. Agent, the time you asked about is our busy period at work. The boss is watching here. How dare we be absent from work?" Avila slapped the girl's butt hard, and the girl giggled and dodged. Roan frowned when he saw this, and pulled Avila and asked seriously, "Are you sure these people were at work yesterday? Did anyone run out to deliver tequila? Think about it carefully, and don't hide it from me. Lying to federal agents is a felony." Roan now said such words. Roan's serious questioning calmed Avila down. After carefully looking around at the men and women in the room, he patted his head and said, "There is a black boy named Craig. He is here to work part-time. He is not in the room now. He seems to have gone out with Callista yesterday." "Where is he?" "In the blue room." Upon hearing this news, Roan and Lassie looked at each other, walked through the crowd, and walked out of the room to the blue room mentioned by Avila. A black guy wearing only trousers just walked out of the blue room. Lassie saw this and shouted, "Craig, have you seen Callista yesterday?" Hearing someone calling his name, Craig turned around subconsciously, and when he saw Roan and Lassie in suits, his pupils shrank, and he threw down the toys in his hands and ran away. Fouquet at the moment, when Craig opened his thighs, Roan also rushed towards Craig quickly. The lights in the hall were dim, and Craig himself was a black man. If he really had to hide in a dark corner, it would be difficult for him to find him. As a black man who grew up struggling on the margins of society, Craig was used to running. He had been chased by the New York police before, and now he was not panicked when being chased by the FBI. He not only did not panic when he was running around in the hall, but even chose the best escape direction. Seeing himself getting closer and closer to the shining door, Craig grinned and showed his white teeth. What about the FBI? They were still left behind by him? Do you really think that I have been running for nothing for so many years? Hey, what is this? Hearing the sound of the wind coming from his ears, Craig subconsciously looked up, and suddenly his soul was scared. A grenade. Shit. The moment he saw the grenade hit in front of him, Craig's legs instantly softened, and he subconsciously knelt on the ground and held his head with his hands to prepare for the impact of the explosion. But nothing happened. It wasn't nothing. Lassie walked up and handcuffed Craig. Roan picked up the grenade in Craig's astonished eyes, shook it up and down, and asked with a smile, "I heard that you work part-time here. Can you tell me how to play this toy? Point for K. Shit. Biosy son of a bitch. Asterisk asterisk asterisk." Craig, who realized that he was deceived by the toy, cursed loudly. The words were so dirty that Lassie frowned. She raised her hand to grab the grenade from Roan's hand and stuffed it into Craig's mouth. "Don't curse. You'll have plenty of time to curse when you return to the FBI. Woo woo." Hearing that Roan and Lassie were going to take him back to the FBI headquarters, Craig immediately became timid and shook his head repeatedly. Seeing that Craig whimpered a few times and stopped cursing, Roan wanted to pull the grenade out of his mouth and asked a few questions, but found that he couldn't pull it out. Lassie. 10 minutes later, in the purple room, Lassie used the lubricant that was available in every room and finally succeeded in pulling the grenade out of Craig's mouth. Ugh. The lubricant may not taste good. After the grenade left his mouth, Craig hugged the trash can in the room and vomited wildly. Lassie went to the bathroom to clean her hands with an ugly face. Roan patted Craig on the shoulder and asked gently, "Tell me, how did you kill Callista?" "What?" Hearing Roan's question, Craig was so scared that he almost threw the trash can aside. He looked up and answered, "I didn't kill anyone. You can't do this. You can't use me as a scapegoat." It was 2005, only 4 years after the plane crashed into the building. Craig had heard a lot in recent years that the FBI could not solve the case, so they arrested some ethnic minorities to take the blame. There were many blacks among them, and even more Arabs. Roan had just joined the FBI and was not yet aware of the FBI's tricks. Seeing that Craig did not admit that he was the murderer, he spread his hands and said, "Callista is missing. Your boss and colleagues said that you were the last person to see her yesterday. If not you, who is the murderer?" Fouquet. Hearing Roan's words, Craig cursed, but hurriedly explained, "Bro, it really wasn't me. I did leave here with Callista yesterday, but we were together for only about 10 minutes. We just lay in bed when she received a phone call and left. I was upset for a long time. Do you have evidence for what you said?" Of course. Craig did not dare to lie about his life in the second half of his life, and said directly, "After leaving Callista's house, I went to find my girlfriend. She can testify for me that I was with my girlfriend from 8:30 last night until this morning." Point, you have a girlfriend? Of course, work is work and life is life. I always keep them very clear. Roan. Please recommend. Please recommend. Chapter 21 Men in Black. Craig was indeed with his girlfriend all night. Mona on the other end of the phone said, "The surveillance shows that after he entered his girlfriend's apartment, he did not go out all night and did not go out to work until after 8 o'clock this morning." Okay. Luo An nodded, hung up the phone, turned to look at Craig, who was handcuffed and sitting on the bed, looking at him nervously, thought for a few seconds, and continued to ask, "You just said that Callista answered a phone call and left. Did you hear what was said on the other end of the phone?" "No." Seeing that Luo An's attitude towards him was much better after the call, Craig breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly replied, "We were both in bed before the phone rang. Callista walked out of the bedroom after the phone rang, but I was lying in bed without moving, so I didn't hear clearly what was said on the other end of the phone. I only heard Callista swearing a few words into the phone." Okay. Lassie walked back to the room and wrote down this information in a small notebook. Luo An pondered for a moment and suddenly looked up and asked, "Why did you turn around and run when my teammates called you just now?" Seeing Craig start to hesitate, Roan narrowed his eyes, took out his other pair of handcuffs and shook them. "Think before you answer. Deceiving federal agents is a felony." Lassie, who was standing by, twitched her eyes when she heard this. Well, I thought you were sent by Callista to arrest me. Craig thought for a few seconds and decided to tell the truth. Anyway, the other party's purpose was not on him, so he said directly, when I was playing with Callista before, I installed a miniature camera in the corner of the bedroom in the room, preparing to take some love videos between us, so that we can reminisce later. Lassie's face was very contemptuous. You are planning to use the video to blackmail the other party for money in the future. Whatever you say. Craig shrugged. Anyway, he has not threatened the other party yet, and even if he is accused, he will only be fined at most. After hearing what Craig said, Roan discovered something and asked with a puzzled look on his face, "Where are the cameras you installed?" Our agent searched every room in the villa, especially the bedrooms. It is impossible that they couldn't find your cameras. Villa. Craig was stunned. Callista's home is in downtown Rivington. Where is the villa? I hate rich people. In downtown Rivington, Lassie got out of the SUV, looked at the single family apartment in front of her inside, and said to Roan next to her, especially rich people like this who have houses everywhere. Think about it positively, Lassie. Roan took out the Glock 18 with the muzzle downward and slowly walked towards the door of the apartment. If we rescue rich people like this, we can get more thank you money. Makes sense. Lassie nodded. The salary of the FBI is so low. If there is no bonus after solving the case, or the victim will give some reward money afterwards, that little salary is not as good as going out to find a bar, to dance striptease to make money. The two stood on the left and right of the apartment door, looked at each other, and Roan counted down 3, 2, 1 with his hands, then kicked the door open and rushed in. FBI open up. After shouting a slogan loudly, Roan searched the first room in the apartment carefully with the Glock 18 in hand. Perhaps it was due to his memories of his previous life. Roan now likes to shout slogans more and more. Safe. Safe. Several rooms in the apartment were empty. After confirming that it was safe, Roan walked to the bedroom and took out a camera from behind the bookshelf that Craig mentioned. The camera was working all the time, and Roan felt it was hot when he touched it. It seems that this house is Sabina's temporary residence when she goes out to play. Lassie rummaged around in the bedroom and found a box of toys under the bed. She took a look and kicked it back. She tilted her head and pouted. I don't know why her marriage with Darren still exists. Didn't Darren say that he was just playing with that man and he loved Sabina? Roan took out the memory card from the camera and laughed. Maybe Sabina thinks so too. She loves Darren, and she's just indulging herself by going out to play. Maybe. After a quick search of the apartment, they found that except for the bedroom, the other rooms were basically under shade, and there was nothing there. Roan took Lassie and drove back to the headquarters. Leave it to you, Mona. Arriving at the office of the number 5 investigation team, Roan handed the memory card he found to Mona and asked her to look through the video records inside. Simple. Mona looked relaxed, her slender fingers clacking on the computer. A few minutes later, a video was shown to everyone. First, there was a few minutes of video of Sabina and Craig playing on the bed. Mona pressed the fast play button to skip this part. A male agent subconsciously sighed and then was glared at by Lassie. Roan. Is it that serious? The next scene was just as Craig said. Sabina received a call and the interaction between the two was interrupted. Sabina left the bedroom to answer the phone, asked Craig to leave, and packed her clothes, and turned to leave. The picture was normal until Mona fast forwarded the video to 4 hours later. A man wearing a black coat, black pants, a black mask and a black hat suddenly pushed open the bedroom door and walked in. The black mask man found a few toys under the bed in the bedroom and took out a few tempting clothes from the closet, stuffed them all into a school bag, and turned to leave the room. He did not forget to close the bedroom door before leaving. The last scene of the video was Lassie and Roan breaking into the room with guns. Mona turned the video to the moment when the man in the black mask entered the bedroom and shrugged. Obviously, this man is not a thief. He didn't steal money or bags, but toys and clothes. It was obvious that he was targeting Sabina. This man is most likely the real murderer behind the scenes. Can you try to confirm the identity of this man? The man in black was not as tall as Darren, and his figure seemed to be a little thinner than the black man Craig. It seemed that the murderer was not the two of them. Roan patted Mona on the shoulder, looked up at the clock at the front of the office area, and said, "It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon now, and it has been 11 hours since the victim disappeared. I'll try my best." Mona's face was not very good. There was no way. The other party was fully armed, and only his eyes were exposed. She could only try to see if there were any surveillance cameras around the apartment. Mona's 10 fingers were tapping on the computer. Roan turned his head and looked at Lassie, saying, "Go contact the agent in the villa and ask him to bring Mr. Darren to us. Maybe he can identify the man in the video." "Okay." Lassie nodded and turned to call the agent in the villa. Everyone had their own work. Roan sat in the chair and touched his belly. He felt a little hungry after running all afternoon. He looked around and found that there was some unopened food on Ryder's table. Ryder was still outside asking relatives of the victims of the serial murder case for information. He was not in the office. Roan did not hesitate and sat directly in Ryder's chair, opened a package of food and started eating. There was some information about the victims of the serial murder case on the table. Roan opened a folder and checked it while eating. "Please collect. Please collect." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22, also a medical center. In the Lake Corpse serial murder case, the 4 victims' home addresses, social environments, life experiences, etc. seem to have nothing to do with each other. The only common feature is their own conditions. For example, they are all married women and have a good relationship with their husbands. Even the youngest, Natalie Carliel, is only 25 years old, but she has been married for 2 years. I remember that New Jersey seems to stipulate that men can get married when they are 14 and women can get married when they are 12. Thinking of this, Luo An shook his head repeatedly. America is promoting the protection of various rights of minors like crazy, but then allows child marriage and child labor. Luo An remembered that in his previous life, a former president of the United States was prosecuted for being an adult female star. Some people on the internet wondered why the top leaders of the hostile party had to prosecute him for being an adult female star. Someone answered below, because the minors are all related to the top leaders of the hostile party. Shaking his head and throwing the mess in his mind aside, Roan continued to check the information in the folder and suddenly found a problem in the photo. Since the 4 victims were all married, why were there no rings of the victims in the photos of the autopsy report and the photos of the scene inspection record? What does it mean that the murderer took the victim's ring? Roan narrowed his eyes and analyzed. Souvenirs? Or is it a different kind of possessiveness? Just like when one person steals a toy from another, the thief always wants to erase the mark of the original owner on the toy. Maybe it has something to do with the victim's husbands. Thinking of this, Roan sent a text message to Reid, asking him to focus on the interpersonal relationships, work, and life of the 4 victims' husbands, and then returned to his seat. Half an hour later, husband Darren arrived at the number 5 investigation team, and Roan and Lassie took him into the conference room. Sitting in the chair, Darren looked at the screenshot of the video portrait on the laptop computer, frowning. "I don't think I know this person. At least I have no impression of him." "Are you sure, Mr. Darren?" Roan put his hands on the table, his face serious. "This man is most likely the real murderer who kidnapped your wife. I hope you think about it carefully." Okay. Hearing Roan's words, Darren immediately lowered his head to check the screenshot of the portrait again, but after looking left and right, he still had no impression, so he had to shake his head helplessly. "I'm really sorry, Agent, I really have no impression. I have probably never seen this person in my life." Okay. Roan was a little disappointed after taking the computer, but then he thought that this is how case handling is, and clues cannot be found so easily, so he thanked Darren and was about to get up and leave the office. "Wait a minute, Agent Roan." Seeing that Roan was about to leave, Darren hurriedly stood up and called him and asked, "Where did you find the people in the photo? Can you tell me? Maybe I can ask someone else." Hearing Darren's words, Roan subconsciously kept silent, and Lass's eyes looking at Darren became a little strange. What's wrong? Darren was a little confused, and then he seemed to think of something, and his face suddenly became very panicked. Is this not the murder scene of a serial kidnapping case? Is my wife okay? Is she still alive? Answer me. Ahem. Seeing that Darren was so excited that he seemed to jump on him, Roan hurriedly took a step back and motioned him to sit down first, tilted his head, and motioned Lassie to bring the business card, and then comforted Darren. It's like this, Mr. Darren, this is not a medical center. It can be considered a medical center. Seeing the puzzled look on Darren's face, Roan sighed. He placed the pink membership card on the table in the conference room, briefly introduced the game center under the cafe, Sabina's status there, and everything that the black man Craig said, then called up the video clip about the man in black in the computer and said, this is the situation. The video shows the man in black who broke into your wife's apartment. He is most likely the murderer who kidnapped your wife. I hope you can identify him carefully. This will be very helpful for us to find and rescue your wife. After that, Roan glanced at Darren, whose face was flushed, and turned to walk out of the conference room with Lassie. The moment the door was closed, Darren's hoarse voice came over. Please make me a cup of coffee later. Thank you. Okay. 10 minutes later, Roan pushed open the door of the conference room with a cup of coffee, and saw the smashed laptop at a glance. Thank you. Darren, whose complexion had returned to normal, thanked Luo An. After taking his coffee, he said calmly, I really didn't recognize the man in black, but I have sent his photo to other people in the company. Maybe they will recognize him. Okay. Luo An nodded. This Darren was a ruthless man. I will compensate you with the laptops. 10. After taking a sip of coffee, Darren stood up and straightened his suit. He said seriously, but I hope to stay with you tonight until I find my wife. Okay. Luo An nodded and agreed to the other party for the sake of 10 computers. Walking Darren out of the conference room and motioning to Lassie to take Darren to a seat far away to rest, Roan walked to Mona, kneaded her shoulders and asked, thank you for your hard work, Mona. Have you found out the identity of the man in black? Not yet. After searching for a long time without finding any clues, Mona's spirit was a little depressed. Pointing to the picture in the big bud computer, she said, there is no camera at the door of Sabina's apartment, and there is no camera opposite the apartment. Only the cameras of the two bakeries on the east and west sides of this street are connected to the network, but their cameras did not record the man in black at all. Didn't record it? Roan raised his eyebrows and asked, is it that the man in black never appeared at all, or never appeared at all? Mona clicked on the keyboard, and the screen on the computer began to play the pictures recorded by the cameras of the two bakeries. I checked all the people who appeared in the surveillance video within half an hour before and after the man in black appeared. Among them, women were excluded, children were excluded, and gray-haired old people were excluded. There were only 6 men left, but none of these 6 men were wearing black clothes or black hats, nor were they carrying bags. I compared the shoes of these 6 men, and they didn't match the men in black either. After hearing what Mona said, Lassie, who was sitting next to her, subconsciously hugged Mona's slender waist and asked in confusion, could the murderer be in an apartment on that street? Possibly. Luo An nodded. The street was so long, and there was no place to hide, except in the apartment. Seeing that Luo An agreed with her, Lassie took out her cell phone decisively. Then I will contact the New York Police Department now and ask them to send a few patrol officers to go door to door on that street to ask if anyone has seen Sabina. By the way, check to see if there are any houses on that street that have old-fashioned surveillance videos that are not connected to the internet. If so, bring the videos back. Wait a minute. Luo An frowned. They are the FBI and have no affiliation with the New York Police Department. Is it really okay to ask them so directly? It's okay. Lassie smiled when she heard Luo An's worry. I have an acquaintance in the New York Police Department. This is a simple matter. Okay. Since the other party has an acquaintance, I won't say anything more. Please collect. Please collect. Chapter 23 New Situation. In the office, Lassie was contacting the New York Police Department. Mona was sitting on the side drinking coffee, and Roan was checking the surveillance video on the computer over and over again. Ryder was still asking for clues in downtown Brooklyn. Did you find any clues? After finishing her coffee, Mona walked back to her seat, looking around a few times and asked, by the way, where is my laptop? It was smashed by Darren just now. Raising his eyebrows, without answering Mona's question, Luo An pointed to the surveillance video in the computer and asked, Mona, I just found out that the surveillance video shows that within 10 minutes before and after the man in black disappeared, only 3 cars passed through this block. Can you find out the identity information of the owners of those 3 cars? Hearing Luo An's words, Mona's attention was diverted. Looking down at the blurred license plate number in the computer, Mona looked a little embarrassed. Let me try. Thank you for your hard work. Luo An hurriedly stood up and gave his seat to Mona. Lassie also came over after making a call. I have contacted the patrol police, and they will get back to me in half an hour. Seeing Mona's 10 fingers dancing on the keyboard again, Lassie asked, any clues? No, just a vague idea. Luo An sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples and closing his eyes to rest. The street where Sabina's apartment is located is lined with apartments and there are no side roads at all. If the man in black wants to leave that street, it is impossible for him not to pass by the bakeries on both sides of that street. That's right. Lassie nodded, agreeing with Luo An's opinion. Luo An continued, so the man in black either didn't leave the street, but hid in an apartment on both sides of the street. Or he changed his appearance in a way we don't know yet and left the street. So, driving away is certainly a good way. I found out. Luo An. The sound of typing paused, and Mona's voice was very happy. The cameras in those 2 bakeries are of good quality, and the license plates of the 3 cars can be barely seen. I have found the owner information of the 3 cars. Oh. Lassie hurried to the computer when she heard this, but Luo An didn't go over, but asked, are the owners male or female? The owners are 2 men and 1 woman. Lassie looked at the information that popped up on the computer and read, one of the men is a lawyer who lives on that street. The other man is a supermarket manager, and the remaining woman is a newspaper reporter. A lawyer, a manager, and a reporter. Luo An asked, can you see that the people driving in the video are the owners themselves? Looking at the blurry image, after being magnified on the computer, Lassie's mouth twitched. It's impossible to see clearly. It seems that the cameras used by these 2 bakeries are very old and have only been connected to the internet recently. Seeing Luo An lowering his head and pondering, Lassie thought for a while and asked, do you want me to contact the New York police again and ask them to send a few patrol officers to the homes of these 3 people and simply question them? No. Luo An shook his head. The New York Police Department was not opened by them, so how could they let them do all the work? It's a small matter to work without putting in effort, but it would be more troublesome if they alerted the enemy. Who knows if the man in black will choose to kill Sabina directly in a hurry. Wait a minute. Just as Luo An was thinking about which of the 3 people to check first, Mona's somewhat frightened shout came over. Come and have a look. I just checked the newspaper where the female reporter works. They issued a notice last week saying that the female reporter had been fired because she had been missing for a week without reason. Fouquet. Lassie hurriedly turned her head to look at the missing person notice in the computer and said in astonishment, last week, the notice was issued that the reporter had been missing for a week without reason. The female reporter has disappeared for 3 weeks. Then who was driving the car yesterday? Seeing the notice in the computer, Luo An immediately stood up and asked, where is the female reporter's home? It's in Queens. 7 o'clock in the evening, Queens. An apartment building. Luo An took Lassie and several patrolmen sent by Lassie's acquaintances in the New York Police Department to the elevator together. Luo An looked blank as he watched Lassie and a female patrolman agree to go shopping together after the work was over. If he guessed correctly, Luo An felt that Lassie's so-called acquaintance in the police station was 100% a woman. People's hearts are not as good as they used to be, and the world is going downhill. In his heart, he severely criticized Lassie's leniency, but on second thought, Luo An found that he could do the same, and he was not much worse than Lassie. Ding, the elevator door slowly opened, and Luo An immediately threw the mess in his mind aside, took out the Glock 18, and held it in his hand, and then, in the surprised eyes of Lassie and the patrolmen, he took out a stun grenade. Luo An shrugged, indicating that he lacked a sense of security, and led the team out of the elevator. But just after walking out of the elevator, the sound of banging on the door and a man's shouting reached everyone's ears. Ron and Lassie looked at each other and hurriedly slowed down their pace. Selena? Selena, are you there? At the door of the female reporter's rental house, a middle-aged white man in a brown leather jacket was knocking on the door frantically. Selena, I heard that you were fired. Don't move. Seeing that the door the man was knocking on was the room they were targeting, Ron and Lassie raised their guns and controlled the other party without saying a word. Raise your hands. Don't make any unnecessary movements. Hey, don't get me wrong. I'm not a thief. Seeing Ron and his group fully armed, Joseph Smith was frightened and hurriedly raised his hands obediently, shouting at the same time, my name is Joseph, I'm a reporter, and my driver's seat is in the right pocket of my jacket. Don't shoot. Ron walked up and took out the driver's seat from Joseph's pocket. He briefly flipped through it and handed it to the patrolman behind him to let them check the authenticity of the driver's seat, and then asked, while doing a simple body search, why are you looking for Reporter Serena? She and I were partners before. Not finding any dangerous items on Joseph, Ron waved his hand to signal Lassie and others to put down their guns. Joseph was relieved and explained, I heard that Serena was fired from the newspaper a few days ago, so I wanted to come and ask her if she wanted to rejoin my team. Ignoring Joseph's explanation, Ron handed him over to the patrol officers and did not let him leave for the time being. He also sent Joseph's relevant information to Mona and asked her to simply check Joseph. Then, Ron and Lassie stood on the left and right sides of the door, counted down 3 times, and kicked the door open. FBI, open up. The two quickly checked every room to confirm that no one was in each room. Safe. The apartment room was empty. Ron and Lassie looked at each other and put down their guns together. Lassie sighed, it seems that we are a step late. Please collect. Chapter 24 Case Escalation. No, it's not that I'm late, it's that I'm too late. Luo An wrinkled his nose and smelled a faint smell in the room. He walked to the kitchen with a gloomy face. After turning around twice, he looked at Lassie, who was confused, and said, call the trace inspection team. We need to check carefully here. Why? Lassie took out her mobile phone obediently. After dialing the number, she still subconsciously asked, what did you find? Luo An's face was very ugly. Hearing Lassie's question, he grabbed the door of the refrigerator in the kitchen and opened it fiercely. Pieces of frozen meat were neatly placed in the refrigerator, and on the top layer of the refrigerator, a female head with eyes open was quietly looking at Lassie across the refrigerator. Holy shit. Lassie was so scared that she almost threw the phone away. What did you say? The person on the other end of the phone was very unhappy. What does it mean to curse someone in the first sentence of the phone call? Half an hour later, that Joseph can be ruled out as a suspect for the time being. It was Mona's crisp voice on the other end of the phone. She said calmly amid the clacking sound of the keyboard, according to the information, Mr. Joseph is a freelance reporter. He has been seen wherever there has been a car accident in New York City in recent months. And within 2 hours before and after Sabina was kidnapped, he was arguing with the program producer at NBC TV station and had no time to commit the crime. Okay. Ron nodded and continued to ask, what did the boss of the newspaper where Selena works say? They said they issued a notice saying that Selena was fired because she had lost contact for a week without reason. Didn't they send anyone to look for Selena during this period? Hearing Ron's question, Mona, who had already learned of Selena's death, said angrily, the boss of the newspaper said that they called Selena for a week and no one answered, so they fired Selena. As for going to Selena's house to find her, the boss of the newspaper said that they have few people in the newspaper and are busy with work, so they don't have time to send anyone to Selena's house to look for her. Moreover, there are many freelance journalists like Selena who just quit their jobs, and there are also many who just lose contact. Their newspapers have long been accustomed to it. Okay. Luo An nodded. Thank you for your hard work, Mona. After hanging up the phone, Luo An found that when he was on the phone, Lassie asked the patrolman to write down Joseph's contact information and home address, and then drove the other party away. Seeing the refrigerator on the side, Luo An walked to Lassie and whispered, "Sorry, Lassie, I didn't mean to scare you." Luo An was actually shocked. He just smelled a strong smell of blood in the refrigerator at that time, so he judged that the murderer killed the female reporter and stuffed her into the refrigerator. After all, Lassie is a professionally trained FBI agent, and seeing a corpse is not a big deal. But he never expected that the murderer actually dismembered the victim and placed it neatly inside and put the head on the top. "It's not your fault." Hearing Roan's apology, Lassie shook her head and said, "I was just thinking, from the perspective of the body, it doesn't look like the murderer's first murder. So how many other women have been killed by the murderer before this?" Roan was silent. He couldn't answer this question. America has its own national conditions, and it is very rich in serial killers, most of which target women for killing. No one knows how many women die in the hands of these perverts every year. Just as Roan was thinking about what to say to comfort Lassie, Agent Nell from the Trace Examination Department came over and handed Roan a small evidence bag, saying in a serious tone, "We found fingerprints that do not belong to Selena in the bathroom. They have been sent back to the inspection department for comparison, and there should be news soon. In addition, these are 2 credit cards found in the bathroom. After comparison, we judge that they are most likely not the victims, and we did not find the victim's credit card." "Okay, thank you." Taking the evidence bag, Agent Nell from the Trace Examination Department turned and left. Luo An looked at the 2 credit cards with a very ugly expression. Lassie beside him seemed to understand something and hesitated. If nothing unexpected happened, it should be the owner of the credit card who had an accident. Luo An took out his Nokia again and called Mona. "Mona, check the credit cards with numbers **3 and *8 and find out who the owners of these 2 credit cards are." "Okay." There was a crackling sound of typing on the other end of the phone, and Luo An and Lassie looked at each other in silence on the other end of the phone. "Found it." 3 minutes later, Mona's voice came from the other end of the phone. "The owner of the 2 credit cards is named." Without waiting for Mona to introduce, Lassie interrupted the other party and asked directly, "The name is not important. They are 2 women, right?" Point yes. Mona felt her throat a little dry, but her heart beat faster and faster, and her mind became more and more angry. Why do murderers always kill women? Why? As a man, Roan looked down at the information of the owners of the 2 credit cards Mona sent him. He saw that one of them lived in Brooklyn. After 2 seconds of hesitation, he called Ryder. "What's wrong, Roan?" Ryder, who was checking the information of the Lake Corpse serial murder case, was a little puzzled when he received Roan's call and asked, "Have you found clues to the serial murder case?" "Yes, I found clues to the serial murder case, but it's not the serial murder case in your hands." Roan's words made Ryder a little confused, but Ryder still understood Roan's arrangement for him. "Go to the apartment in downtown Brooklyn, right?" Ryder nodded and repeated Roan's arrangement for him. "If there is a body inside, I will call you immediately and contact the Trace Examination Department at the same time, right?" "That's right." Hearing Roan's affirmation on the other end of the phone, Ryder said it was a small matter and hung up the phone. After hanging up the phone, Luo An stopped Lassie, who was searching the room with the Trace Examination Agent Neil, and said, "Let's go back to the headquarters first, Lassie. This matter needs to be reported to the team leader Augustus." "Okay." Investigation Team Number 5, 8 o'clock in the evening. Mr. Darren was still sitting in the conference room, waiting for news from his wife Sabina. It had been 14 hours since Sabina disappeared. In the team leader's office, Augustus sat on a chair, his right hand on his forehead, looking at Roan and Lassie with an extremely complicated look. "So what you mean is that now the disappearance and kidnapping of the rich woman has been upgraded to a new serial murder case?" "Actually, it's still uncertain." Roan shook his head. "We don't know whether the owner of the 2 credit cards is alive or dead." Riyadh went to the Brooklyn apartment to investigate. Ding ling ling. Halfway through the words, the Nokia ringtone rang. Roan just pressed the answer button, and Riyad's standard loud voice came from the other end of the phone. Fuck, Roan. You will never guess what happened here. There are a lot of meat in the refrigerator. And, okay, contact the trace examination department. Without waiting for Riyad to finish, Roan calmly interrupted the other party, then hung up the phone, looked up and said to Augustus, now it's a serial murder case. Augustus. Please recommend. Please recommend. Chapter 25. The case was on TV. Fouquet. Augustus cursed in a low voice, not knowing whether he was cursing Roan or the serial killer. Lassie, go out for a while. Okay. After letting Lassie leave the team leader's office temporarily, Augustus asked Roan with a serious face, Roan, kidnapping cases and serial murder cases are different, do you know that? I know. Roan nodded. In comparison, the lead detective who cracked the serial murder case and caught the real murderer of the serial murder case, apart from the fact that his fame increased, actually did not get much money because the reward amount for the case was fixed. In most cases, the families of the victims in the serial murder case would not give too much thank you money because after the death of the victims, many families became broken and it was normal to have no money. Kidnapping cases were different because the criminals in the kidnapping case were seeking money and the families of the kidnapped victims also understood this. So when the detectives helped them rescue their loved ones, they generally would not be stingy in paying thank you money. Anyway, they would give money to the kidnappers, and the thank you money given to the detectives was less than that given to the kidnappers. Americans also understand that, if you want a horse to run, you have to feed it with grass. This is also an unwritten rule in America. Seeing Luo An nod, Augustus was very satisfied. He liked such subordinates who understood things at a glance, so he continued, our number 5 investigation team has just been established, and serial murders are not suitable for us. The reason why I took on the Lake Corpse serial murder case was because the case spanned a long time after all. It would be best if we could solve the case. If we couldn't solve it, the team leader would not criticize us and would only transfer the case to other investigation teams. So I took on the Lake Corpse serial murder case, mainly to let you gain experience. Kidnapping cases are different. Sometimes this kind of case is difficult, and sometimes it is easy. I took on the disappearance of rich woman kidnapping case, mainly for training. It would be best if we could solve the case. If we can't solve the case, I told you before that I would transfer Riyad to take charge, and you will accumulate experience, and there will be opportunities in the future. Hearing Augustus's talk, Luo An's expression was a little confused. Good man, I was thinking about making money, and you were thinking about politics. The two people were thinking in completely opposite directions. After talking for a long time, Augustus felt his mouth was a little dry. Roan got up and poured him a cup of coffee. Augustus was very satisfied. After drinking the coffee, he finally asked, so, the situation now is, are you sure you can catch the murderer? If you are not sure, I will immediately hand over this case to other investigation teams. After all, 14 hours have passed since the 24-hour golden time. Roan lowered his head and thought. Just now in the Queen's apartment, when the trace investigation team's agent Neil was sorting out the body parts, he briefly introduced the state of the body parts to Roan. According to the thickness of the frost on the surface of the body parts and the degree of freezing of the body parts themselves, Neil roughly judged that these body parts were not frozen for a long time, roughly 2 to 3 days. If Agent Neil's judgment is correct, it means that after kidnapping Selena, the murderer tortured her for more than 2 weeks before killing her. Judging from this perspective, the female billionaire Sabina should still be safe, and it is highly likely that she has not been killed by the murderer. Of course, nothing is absolute. Who knows what a perverted serial killer thinks? Next, the 3 most important things are, who is the murderer? Where is the murderer's home address? Where is the murderer hiding now after kidnapping Sabina? It is still uncertain who the murderer is. The trace examination department did find a fingerprint that did not belong to the victim in the apartment in Queens. But now it is not 100% certain that the fingerprint is the murderer's fingerprint. Not only that, it takes a long time for the trace examination department to compare fingerprints, and there are only 11 hours left in the 24-hour golden time. At the same time, the trace examination department can only compare fingerprint in the FBI's criminal fingerprint database. In other words, if the serial killer has never committed a crime before and has never entered fingerprint in the local police station, then the FBI's fingerprint examination database cannot find the identity of the murderer at all. If you don't know who the murderer is, it is even more impossible to find the murderer's home address. The only way to think now is, where did the murderer hide after kidnapping Sabina? Luo An closed his eyes tightly, his brain spinning wildly, thinking hard about everything that happened today, trying to analyze the murderer's behavior pattern and find the murderer's hiding place now. But serial killers are completely different from real killers after all. Luo An thought for a long time, but couldn't analyze what a perverted idea was like. Just when Luo An was about to give up, a gleam of light flashed in his eyes, and he suddenly thought of something. Could it be that the murderer saw Luo An's expression of lowering his head and thinking? Augustus understood that the other party was analyzing clues, so he didn't urge him, and picked up the coffee to take another sip. Bang! The door of the team leader's office was pushed open by someone. Augustus was startled by the sudden loud noise, and the coffee in his hand spilled directly on his stomach. Fouquet. It burned me to death. Augustus jumped up from the chair because of the burn, grabbed the folder on the table, and subconsciously wanted to throw it at the person who entered the office without knocking. But when he saw that the person who broke into the office was Darren, the husband of the wealthy woman Sabina, Augustus hurriedly stopped what he was doing and even forgot to wipe the shirt off his stomach. Agent Roan, Sabina was kidnapped by a serial killer, right? Roan was also startled by the door that suddenly opened. Just as he was about to punch the person who interrupted his thoughts, Darren's questioning voice rang in his ears. Roan immediately asked, "Where did you hear that?" He had only told Augustus, Lassie, and Mona about this matter. Could it be that one of Mona and Lassie let it slip? Darren looked extremely anxious. It was said on TV. WTF. Hearing Darren's words, Augustus's face suddenly changed, and he hurriedly left the team leader's office and ran to the front of the office area. There was a big TV that broadcast news 24 hours a day. In the office area, all the agents looked at the blonde female host of the news column on TV with burning eyes. Around 7:30 this evening, an extremely horrific murder occurred in an apartment on a certain street in Queens. The murderer not only dismembered the victim's body, but also put the victim's body in the refrigerator to freeze. According to reliable sources, this case is a serial murder case, and there is only one victim in this apartment. The FBI has already intervened in the investigation, but the FBI has not yet obtained any effective clues. Please pay attention to safety. Fouquet. Shit. By Oziang. After watching the report on TV, Augustus's already dark face became darker than ink. He turned around and looked at everyone in the office area and asked angrily, "Who leaked this case?" Darren on the side had an extremely ugly face and shouted to Augustus, "Was my wife Sabina kidnapped by this perverted murderer? How is she now?" The agents in the office looked at each other, not knowing what had happened. Mona and Lassie, who knew the inside story, tilted their heads and looked at each other with doubts on their faces. According to the customs and practices of the United States, generally speaking, once a case is known by the media, the subsequent development of the case will be greatly affected. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.